Fate, Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 36-38. Chapter 36. Awkward Reunion. Olga Group Pav. Olga nervously licked her lips as her eyes flickered around them. The summons of the knights had walled them in completely, and to make matters worse, the giant behind them was obviously not a summon. The power she could feel radiating from whatever it was made it painfully obvious that it was a servant and obviously a giant. Although the giant wasn't even her greatest concern right now, no. That honor went to the god who was currently threatening them. Who was the god that Castor had killed in life and who was, quite obviously, holding a grudge against them. She was nervously racking her mind thinking of a solution before another voice interrupted. Really? The obviously female voice scoffed. The first visitors we have that aren't those filthy spiders and you're going to kill them. How dull. No, it's worse than that. Your reception is almost as ugly as your legs. A small sound escaped Sullivan which could have been misconstrued as a laugh. An execution was not mine immediate course of action. The voice replied, losing none of its step, and thou hath been warned about such comments. I know. The female voice replied back, however, I can't help it. You have such a girlish and attractive face and then you have the snakes for legs, it's too cruel. Olga nervously stepped forwards, EEXCU. Be silent. Eek. Permission was not given for thou to speak. The effeminate voice boomed, Goff, should the deceiver move, kill him. Sullivan's head slowly turned to stare at the giant in a new light, obviously fighting the urge to take a step back. Very well. Goff rumbled. Olga was surprised that the voice actually sounded rather intellectual. Excuse me. Nero strut forwards, you are the god who lives on this island. Thou art brazen mortal. The voice called back, thy stand before Gwyndolin, dark son of an Orlando, speak with care. I am Nero, Emperor of Rome. Emperor. Gwyndolin, for the first time in the conversation, betrayed a mild hint of confusion. Art thou, perhaps, cursed with beauty? It is natural as emperor I exceed all others in beauty. Nero scoffed, then laughed loudly, although to call it a curse would imply it is wrong to be so. I am beautiful because I am emperor. Thou art confident. Nero. The female voice called back, Nero Claudius. Excuse me. The brass knights parted as a young-looking woman with long purple hair in a white dress stepped in between them, a playfully amused look on her face as she approached and looked the emperor up and down. You aren't a servant. She blinked in surprise, the real Nero Claudius, how curious. Nero blinked, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, but are you perhaps, a goddess? Another one, Sullivan muttered quietly, how wond, he was cut off when one of Goff's arrows implanted itself in the ground next to him. He froze solid, slowly trailing he his to the spear-like arrow in the ground and then back to the giant as he drew back another one. All right. Olga coughed into her hand, looking at the purple-haired goddess. I am Olga Marie Animosphere, director of, what are you? She leaned away as the goddess closed the distance between the two of them, leaning forwards. Oh, you're human, but you aren't a man. She sighed. A shame, a mischievous smile soon came to her face. But I suppose I wouldn't be against pampering you like my younger sister, you are quite pretty. Olga felt a cold shiver go down her spine at the words, nor did she like the gleam in the goddess' eye. Lord Gwyndolin. Solaire stepped forwards, might I beg an audience with you? Thy speaks with respect. Gwyndolin acknowledged, and thou knows my name. Speak human. I am Solaire, knight of Astora and warrior of the Sunlight Covenant. He introduced himself. I beg your forgiveness for any perceived hostilities, but we did not come to do battle with you. Thine speech does not match thine actions. Gwyndolin replied sternly, thy claim to peace rings hollow whilst the deceiver stands before me. It was my guidance that brought them here. Solaire spread his arms wide, we seek only your aid. Mine aid. Gwyndolin sounded perplexed, and what, aid, does thou seek from me? More importantly, by what right didst thou expect mine aid? Lord Gwyndolin, I would not accuse you of ignorance, but I must ask of how much you are aware of the outside world. Thou art the first granted passage to the island. The Lord replied, all others' vessels were crewed by foul beasts and dealt with accordingly. Very well, thou may inform me. I thank you. Solaire nodded his head, the land is threatened by disaster, the Roman Empire, of which you have heard the emperor speak. The woman, yes. Indeed. This empire is threatened by a most cruel being, Saint Aldrich of Th. Aldrich. The god repeated the word quietly, a tenseness in his voice, the abomination. I confess, I have not heard of him myself. However, Sir Ashen Ponti. The deceiver served the devourer. Gwyndolin seethed. For what purpose does he now stand before me to request aid? Surely thou art aware of this. Quote. I am, Lord Gwyndolin. Quote. The two humans and the knight may approach. Gwyndolin spoke after a moment. The deceiver and the hollow armor shall remain. Well, it appears he is in quite the mood now. The goddess sighed. Oh, I am Stano. She gave a beatific smile. Feel free to praise my name. Olga whimpered. Nero remained rather confused as she looked around for a few moments and then shrugged, throwing an arm around Olga and dragging her forwards with a grin. Come, pale rose, we're going to meet a god. Her only response was a louder whimper. The inside of the cave was, to all intents and purposes, a palace. The furniture was grandeur, smooth and polished with a primarily golden design. Nero nodded her head. I approve, this is a most fitting place for a god to reside. She paused for a few moments. Pair of gods. It appears to be an Orlando. Soler pondered as he walked through the hallway, or a replica of it, to think I would see it again. Thy praise is welcome, but 'tis only a fake. The voice of Gwyndolin called out to them. The group found themselves before a brilliant golden door. After a few moments, the doors opened themselves to reveal a large room. In the center was a single chair, upon which sat the presumed Gwyndolin. He was, surprisingly, rather short. Garbed in a pure white dress which covered most of his body. Upon his head sat a seven-pointed golden crown which covered the top half of his face, the lower half revealing pale skin with pinkish lips. Flowing down from under the crown was shoulder-length silver hair. Although the eye-catching thing, aside from his effeminate features, were the half-dozen snakes which seemed to appear from underneath the bottom of his dress. The pale-skinned pythons all stared at the group as one. Gwyndolin raised his left hand and waved it. A decorative chair, similar to his own, formed next to him. Thou may be seated, Stano. Thank you. The goddess curtsied her head before gracefully moving over and sitting herself down next to the Lord. Thy case may be presented, mortals. Gwyndolin looked back at them. Should I find it wanting, thine lives shall be forfeit. Olga swallowed nervously before she stepped forwards. I am. The question was directed to thy mistress, concubine. Gwyndolin interrupted her, motioning at Nero. She is the highest authority. Company concu. Olga gaped, then steadily grew red with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. She stomped her foot on the ground. I am not a concubine. I am not a toy or little sister to be pampered. I am a mage of the clock tower, damn it, and I am fed up of being ridiculed, ignored and made a joke of. I am the director of Chaldea and am only here because the freak of nature that killed you is here as well. She panted heavily while the ensemble stared at her. Oh, yes, Stano slowly nodded her head, the smile seemingly intensifying. You are most amusing. I approve. Gwyndolin, however, merely stared at her for several seconds before slowly cocking their head to the side. Thou art confident, for a human, and disrespectful to thy betters. Olga slowly paled in realization of who she had vented against before she could open her mouth to sputter forth whatever apologize she could think of. Nero interrupted. Perhaps you are disrespectful. She strut forwards, placing her hands on her hips. I have brought Olga here in my confidence while her subordinate fights our shared foe. God you might be, however, as emperor, I will tolerate no insult against one whom I have faith in. Quote. Thy hath the words of a leader, I suppose. Gwyndolin muttered, then looked back at Olga. Very well, human. Speak thy piece. Thank you. She stuttered, then coughed. As I was saying. I am from a group called Chaldea. We were sent here to deal with the current threat to the Roman Empire because time is afflicted. Gwyndolin interrupted her. Olga sputtered and widened her eyes in shock. Howdy. Do not assume this is my first relation with the poisoning of the passage of the world. He waved her off. The corruption of time was commonplace in Londor. I have witnessed it many times before. Thou art here to correct it, no? Well, Olga slowly nodded her head. Why yes. We're here to fix what we call a singularity, brought about by the use of the Holy Grail. These events were never supposed to occur. That explains thine purpose in these lands. Gwyndolin nodded. The holder of this lord vessel is Aldrich. We suspect so. Olga nodded her head. That is what the evidence points towards. The presence of the deceiver. Gwyndolin tilted his head. For what purpose does he travel with your company? She coughed. He offered to help. Thine joke is in poor taste. If I may, Lord Gwyndolin. Soler stepped forwards. Lady Olga speaks truly. He went on, the pont. False pontiff. Gwyndolin hissed, the snakes around his legs joining in. Quote. False pontiff. Solaire corrected, he did indeed offer to aid us and has done much to that goal. The deceiver told thee of his hatred for stagnation. Nero and Olga blinked in surprise. Do not look so shocked, that is likely the one truth he spun. So, he won't. He will. Gwyndolin interrupted, it is his nature. The ambition of the deceiver is well hidden, cloaked in veiled answers. Thou should not so readily believe his tales and claims. Well, Sir Ash said something similar. Solaire chuckled and scratched the back of his helmet. Well, he did kill Sullivan in life, I suppose. Pleasant news. Gwyndolin mused, however, thou have yet to give reason for mine aid. Quote. Revenge. Olga offered, against your killer. Through that logic, I should have Esser Goff and Sullivan right now, Gwyndolin replied, unless thou art prepared to part with him. Loath as I am to admit it, despite his rather obtuse and ugly personality. Nero sighed, he is useful, few others know our foe as well as him. Gwyndolin hummed, thy speaketh truly. However, that knowledge comes from being in the Devourer's camp, again, why should I spare him? Olga suddenly thought of something, how come you haven't killed him yet? She wondered. Gwyndolin turned his attention to her sharply, you hate him so much, but you haven't actually killed him yet. Quote. Unless, she snapped her fingers, you need him for something don't you? Quote. Thou art bold. Pygmy. Gwyndolin growled, to think I would require anything of. You're becoming too emotional again. Steno reached over and pat him on the shoulder, the Lord flinched at the touch but relaxed, see. Isn't that better? Besides, she isn't wrong, is she? Quote. No. Gwyndolin eventually ground out, anger is not becoming of a lord, and there is a question I must pose to him. He looked back at the group, leave, and tell the deceiver to enter, thine request for aid, shall depend upon his answer. Ritska Group Pav. No contact at all. None. Romani shook his head. Ritska frowned while Mash held a nervous look on her face. She said she was approaching the island and then, well, we lost contact with her. Is it the same interference? I can't tell. Romani sighed, his head falling into his hands, although what little I did get told me that we were dealing with an extraordinary high reading of divinity, it looks like the claims of a god living there might have been correct. Well, that's either really good news or really bad news. The master replied with concerned expression. After a few moments, he slumped his shoulders. There isn't too much we can do about it at the moment though, is there? No. Romani shook his head. I hate to admit it, but the director is on her own for now. The other news I have for you is that the interference hasn't spread much further, so whatever Aldrich is doing, he seems to have reached his limit. Or he doesn't need to go further. Ritska surmised. Still, I have no idea what the abyss is other than it can be used to make monsters. He frowned, but Ash uses it and doesn't seem to have any issues. Magecraft is like that. Romani shrugged. You can do all sorts of amazing and horrible things with it, might just be like that, although, a frown came to the doctor's face as he crossed his arms. What worries me is the origin of it apparently being the soul. Is that bad? Depends on the extent of manipulation. Romani replied, we've already seen some dabbling in the third magic already, and according to Ash and Sullivan, this is apparently tapping into a reality marble made from the soul of humanity itself or something like it. He chuckled nervously and scratched the back of his neck. I'm not a mage in any sense of the word, but I know enough that something like that is concerning. Doomsday plans, lovely. Ritska rubbed his brow, the director is right. I really do need at least some education on this. He paused, how come Da Vinci hasn't been speaking to us lately? Romani blinked. She's been speaking with Cecilia, something about trying to get a proper understanding of her clairvoyance. Clairvoyance, so she can see the future. Vaguely. Romani replied, and apparently it comes at a cost, although you'd need to ask them about it. Quote. Sullivan said firekeepers aren't meant to have eyes. Ritska cupped his chin in thought. Mash blinked, but, why? A concerned expression came to her face, surely being able to see the future is a good thing. Right. Depends on the clairvoyance. Romani replied, it seems to me that Cecilia has some pretty powerful clairvoyance if she could see when we would be arriving and where, as well as send Solaire off to find Quelaag, however it probably comes at a cost to her, otherwise she wouldn't have an issue with it. But, Mash bit her lip, but that doesn't make sense. Because you lack information. Came the voice of Ash from behind them. Ritska and Mash jumped in surprise at the sudden proximity. They turned to see the saber staring down at them, and firekeepers are not meant to have eyes. Why? Because they are, inherently, clairvoyant. Ash replied, they are all blinded, their eyes removed. That's too cruel. Mash frowned. Surely such a thing has been commonplace for many ages, since the first keepers of fire. Ash cut her off in a dead tone of voice. Although firekeepers are chosen for the role of tending the flame, their eyes removed because they become linked to the flame. The flame as it fades, distorts time, thus they can see everything, even beyond the fading of the flame. He huffed, designed to keep them committed to their purpose. But Cecilia has eyes. Ritska pointed out. Was she different? No, she was blind as well. Ash replied. I gifted her eyes. He went on after a few moments. It wasn't because of her clairvoyance, or using her for anything. I just wanted her to be able to see. He gave a hapless shrug. Shouldn't have been surprised that would backfire. Quote. She can't use her clairvoyance, can she? Romani interjected in a solemn voice. Not fully. No, and not without great pain. He gave a heavy sigh. She still thanks me for gifting her sight. She can see well enough, like you or I. But if she were to use her sight, it would cause her great pain. Mash looked away. She seemed so happy. HMPH. I have never seen her sad. Ash released a light chuckle. She and Gririt got on well enough. Who? Ritska blinked. Ash abruptly stiffened. Quote. He was a friend. His shoulders slumped. He's gone now. My fault. Was all he said, then turned away. I'll take watch. Nighttime is becoming more dangerous. Ritska, Mash and Romani watched him depart with varying levels of concern. He seems glum. Romani muttered, then looked at Ritska. You going to say anything? The master scratched the top of his head. What the heck am I supposed to say? He asked, genuinely confused. I can't exactly tell him everything is fine. He obviously doesn't think so. I'm sure he'll need time, Senpai. Mash gave him a pat on the arm. He's probably a little overwhelmed that Cecilia is back with. Why the heck do you look like my king? Came Gareth's astonished cry from across the camp. Never a dull moment. Ritska sighed, turning away. Good night, Romani. Not going to investigate that? The doctor asked with a raised eyebrow. Ritska gave him a deadpan expression which highlighted the bags under his eyes. Romani. I'm far too tired right now. He yawned, and I'm going to have to try really hard to sleep on those sleeping bags, so maybe tomorrow. Romani stared at him for a few seconds before he gave a small shrug of his own. Fair enough, good night you too. Good night, doctor. Thou says mine face is familiar. Cecilia cocked her head to the side, her metal blindfold held in her hands, revealing the top half of her head. Pale white eyes which seemed to glow stared back in minor confusion, with a face that was virtually identical to both Emperor Nero and King Arthur. You look like the Emperor. Arash stared at her in bemusement. I know she was obsessed with you, but I guess it might have been a vanity thing. He chuckled, you really do look just like her. I see. Cecilia nodded her head, looking back at Gareth. However, thy king was a man, yes. Well, yeah. Gareth nodded. I'm sure she was. Arash slowly turned his head to look at her. Weren't you also supposed to be recorded in history as a boy? Gareth sputtered. And no way. There's no way King Arthur was a girl. Someone would have noticed it. Well, I'm not saying anything. Arash raised his hands in surrender, but if they had the same kind of face as Cecilia here, he gestured at her, something might be up. It was Caliburn. Gareth argued, Caliburn stopped his aging. They couldn't have been a girl. They didn't even have breasts. She proclaimed. But if she stopped aging, how would she have breasts? And no. Gareth exclaimed, it can't be. Surely someone would have. I mean, that. Mash stepped into the group. What's wrong? Mash. Gareth turned to her. You're smart. Look at Cecilia's face. The Shielder servant blinked in surprise at the sudden demand but turned her head to stare at the caster, then widened her eyes in surprise. Cecilia-san. You look just like Nero-san. Yes. The caster nodded. I have been told. She also looks like King Arthur. Gareth went on, but King Arthur was a girl. Gareth-san. Mash winced at the Lancer's blank expression. We met King Arthur in the Fuyuki Singularity, they were a girl. Quote. Arash choked back a laugh, his hand covering his mouth as the Lancer seemed to stare blankly at Mash for a few seconds before her head slowly turned and stared at Cecilia. Oh, she slowly furrowed her brows, but they had a wife. Yes. Quote. Little sis Mordred was their daughter. I don't know too much about that. Quote. I'm confused. Gareth's head fell into her hands. I'm very confused. Olga Group Pav. The trio, with Steno in tow, returned to the beach. The two berserkers and Sullivan were still surrounded by the brass knights. The giant summons parted as they approached, allowing them entry back into the circle. Lord Gwyndolin wishes to speak with you. Solaire motioned to Sullivan. The caster seemed to jolt in surprise before he slowly nodded his head. Without saying a word, he walked past them and into the cave. The summoned knights relaxed themselves, standing at attention while the giant relaxed his bow, placing it on the ground. Excuse me. Solaire called out to the giant, could I ask you something? You may, Knight of Sunlight. The giant nodded back to him in a friendly tone of voice. Lord Gwyndolin called you Esser Goff. Are you, perhaps, the Esser Goff? Ah, so I have stories about me. The giant chuckled, how strange, but to answer thy question, I am indeed Goff of Gwyn's Knights. Goodness me. Solaire chuckled, I suppose I should not even consider myself surprised. Meeting the great wolf Sif and Quelaag of Izalith should really have prepared myself for this. Sif. Goff picked up on Artorius's little pup. A pleased laugh emerged from the giant's throat. How wonderful, I always did enjoy the company of the young wolf. I do not suppose Artorius was with him. I confess, he was not. Solaire shook his head, only the wolf, I'm afraid. He laughed, although he seems to have taken the role of Mount as well. Mount. Goff virtually sputtered in surprise, the wolf was barely at my ankle, to whom is a mount? Sir Gareth. Solaire called back, as far as a mount goes, well, he is quite large. Bigger than a horse, I dare say. My, so the little pup grew did he? He chuckled, how wonderful, and Lady Quelaag. That is a name I have not heard in some time. Tell me, does she still hide her true feelings behind quick-witted comments? She does indeed. Solaire nodded back, although she does seem rather dour. Ah, she was always like that. Goff replied, how does she fare? My word. Nero called out, you are a tall one. And yet your voice is so majestic and intelligent. Oh, thy compliments are most surprising. Goff turned his attention to the small emperor, most accuse us giants of growling our words, thing is nothing more than savage beasts. Nonsense. Nero waved her hand, they clearly have no appreciation for it. She hummed, cupping her chin in thought, I say. Have you ever sung before? Goff openly laughed at the comment, singing, thou says. Ha 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 ha, Esser Artorius once posed me a question like that. I confess, my skill in the craft of song lacking. A shame. Nero sighed, you sound as though you have the voice for it, perhaps you should take up lessons. Thy suggestion is noted. Goff chuckled, and I thank thee for thy kind words. As the aspect of Venus, I must acknowledge beauty in all its forms. Nero proclaimed, placing a hand on her chest, while I confess, your looks may not sway many, your voice makes up for this. Steno chuckled, aspect of Venus. Yes, you are quite funny as well. She smiled, yes, quite amusing. Now, Lady Steno. Goff chided gently, let us not scare our visitors, despite their company, they are most kind. Oh yes. Steno nodded, then looked up at Goff with what could only be described as an amused expression. Still, I am rather surprised and a little annoyed you can speak so brazenly when faced with beauty like mine. Thee must realize thine attempts at seduction do no good on me. Goff chuckled, besides, most knights are immune to the charms of beautiful goddesses like thyself. With Lady Guinevere about the city, we had to be. I'm certain she couldn't compare to my beauty. Steno waved away, then sighed, although I suppose a guardian of a goddess should be expected not to fall in love with her. Well, it was more out of fear of Lord Gwyn. Goff chuckled, besides, few could ever love a giant like myself. Come now. Solaire shook his head, you seem a good fellow. There must have been some who enjoyed your company. Well, there were some, but only those who knew me. The giant shrugged, besides, I held those who hated me no ill will. 'Twas not mine goal to change the approach of all who hated me, besides. I suppose I was lucky to be in my position. Ah, Solaire flinched, yes. Sen's fortress. Indeed. Thou art aware of the fate of most giants. He paused, well, there was Traherne. He was treated well, but perhaps that was his skill at the forge which brought him that, the giant mused, Solaire slowly nodded his head. You speak of the giant blacksmith in an Orlando. At Goff's nod, Solaire chuckled, a good friend of mine spoke of the giant. He had nothing but kind words for him and was touched the giant considered him a friend. Ah, that is good to hear. Goff slowly nodded his head, he never did have many friends beyond myself, to learn he was still shown kindness is a blessing. I don't suppose you would be willing to help us? Olga tentatively asked. Goff slowly turned his head to her. I confess, in other circumstances, I would be glad to offer the aid. He replied, however, I have a duty to protect Lord Gwyndolin and Lady Staino. If they decide to join you, I shall as well. Ah, Olga chuckled nervously, just have to secure the help of the man who cast her betrayed, wonderful. Indeed, thy position is most troubling. Goff affirmed, still, thy seem to be good folk. I shall be saddened if I am forced to kill thee. Not as sad as me, Olga replied in a defeated tone. Goff let out a loud laugh in response. Sullivan and Gwyndolin Pav. Well, this is nostalgic. Sullivan remarked as he observed his surroundings, slowly walking through the halls towards the door at the far end. Although, I confess I hadn't expected to die in a replica of the halls of an Orlando. Thy speaketh of death brazenly. Gwyndolin's voice huffed through the corridors. Did thou truly believe I would strike thee down in the back like a common savage? I did. Sullivan pointed out as he rested his hands on the door's handles. For months I slipped you poison, weakening you so you would not longer pose a threat. He pushed the doors open, finding himself before Gwyndolin. The dark sun sat in a chair at the far end of the room, a large statue of Gwyn overlooking the pair. And then, when you were at your weakest, I left you for Aldrich. He walked forwards, stopping a few meters from the god. If one had done that to me, I would feel obligated for a sense of revenge. He chuckled, but I suspect you have questions for me. The reasoning behind thy betrayal. Quote. You must be joking. Sullivan scoffed. No, you already know why. You cannot have been so stupid to believe you could continue to lock the world in that accursed cycle and none would eventually act against you. Gwyndolin said nothing in response. No, you know why I did it. Sullivan scoffed, but, there is something more you wish to know. He paused. Ah, yes. Yorshka. What fate became of? I did not kill her. Sullivan interrupted him. I only locked her away in a tower. Quote. Why? Gwyndolin asked, perplexed. Thou had already killed me, destroyed Irithyll, for what purpose did thou allow Yorshka to live? Quote. Father Ariandel once told me a story. Sullivan responded, before he became keeper of the painting, it held another name, and was kept in another place long ago. Gwyndolin stiffened but did not interrupt. When he restored the painting, he said that there was a place, where the soul of someone burned still, providing a warmth to the many lost denizens of the world. He paced around the room, continuing on while Gwyndolin remained silent. Ariandel said that one day, this soul vanished. It had not been extinguished or consumed, rather, someone had entered the painting and taken it, presumably through a scrap. He slowly turned to Gwyndolin. I thought nothing of it, merely the old complaints of a feeble man. He scoffed. Then I entered the archives of Lothric, before I came to an Orlando. The archives were grand and I made many discoveries there. Chief of all, was the name of the painting before Ariandel took it. Ariamis. He walked forwards, towards Gwyndolin. Again, I thought this a mere coincidence. Then, I discovered that it held only a single resident of note. Of course, much work had gone into hiding this fact, and it was only after I entered the archives of an Orlando that I began to pay closer attention to it. The caster's shadow fell over Gwyndolin. The god slowly craned his neck up to stare at Sullivan. Yorshka was a crossbreed. There had only ever been one in history and they had long been banished to the painted world, where they died. Until, someone came to the painting, and retrieved their soul. Sullivan slowly backed away, so I did not kill Yorshka, nor did I inform Aldrich of her presence. Gwyndolin continued to remain silent, there was no need for it. I neither hated her nor liked her, or it was misplaced empathy, it mattered not. Gwyndolin slumped in his chair, thou always were clever. HMPH. Sullivan grunted, what eludes me is why. If she was who I suspect, then, oh. I see. He slowly nodded his head. Perhaps you would have been more at home in the painted world than I thought. Quote. Thou truly fights Aldrich. I fight what he represents. Sullivan replied, in the same way I fought what you represented. Once the devourer is dead, I shall kill thee. I expect you shall try. Sullivan nodded, but I suspect I am granted a brief respite. For now. Gwyndolin muttered. For now, if only because thou did not kill her. Yes, I see you have taken a liking to another god. Sullivan mused, although she seems far more assertive than Yorshka. Staino is pleasant company all the same. Gwyndolin replied, begone, return to thy captors. Ritska Pav. The young boy let out another yawn as he made his way to his tent. While he really wasn't an outdoors person, he was gradually getting used to it, although he still preferred a proper bed. The shouting from Gareth had died down, so he assumed Mash had been able to sort out the problem, which was good. He'd rather not have to go off to try and defuse whatever situation had been brewing, but he supposed it couldn't be that bad. Gareth hadn't exactly sounded angry about anything, more shocked. As long as he wasn't going to be disturbed in the middle of the night, that was fine by him. He threw open the tent flap and froze. Only now did he become aware of the subtle heat that had been exuding from the direction of his tent for some time. There, in the center of it, was a mass of bramble, wicker tree and vines, burning and linked together to form an amalgamation of a face. A twisted and warped face, formed in one looking like a perpetual cry of pain, a single red gleaming eye focused on him. He noted that the flames did not set alight anything around him, not had he even sensed the presence of the being in front of him. For that matter, none of his servants obviously had as well. He slowly opened his mouth to cry out before the bush seemed to speak. I did not manifest appear to cause you harm, young human. The bush spoke with mixture of different voices, male-female, young and old, however the predominantly older tone of the voice was apparent. Sounding almost sociable. I have only come here to satisfy some curiosity. WWH. I am but a humble scholar. He introduced himself, but, you may call me Castor, should you desire. F. Fujimaru, he swallowed, doing his best polite bow, or you, I am not here to assassinate you. The bush assured him, I confess, that is the last thing on my mind. It chuckled, a deep reverberating sound that seemed to pass through Ritsuka. He struggled to find his voice, why are you here? Like I said, curiosity. I have already met the other who sparked such a thing, but I also wish to speak with you. Oh okay. Why? What? Ritsuka blinked, why what? Why do you cling to the history of your world? The voice asked again in a gentle manner that eerily reminded Ritsuka of a teacher speaking to a young child, despite the disturbing visage it held. Because it's the incineration of humanity. Ritsuka replied, if I don't do anything, we're all going to die. That is the justification. The voice dismissed, I wish to understand personal motivation. What drives you, young human? Me. Ritsuka blinked. Yes, what is it you hope to gain? What will compel you forwards through your trials? Through the path of a monarch. Mona, I'm not doing this to be a king. He argued back, I'm fixing the singularities because I have to. Ha 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 ha. The bush chuckled as if he had said the funniest thing in the world. Young human, a monarch is one who controls fate, who decides how the world proceeds. What else could you call one who fights against fate but a monarch? Ritsuka frowned, I'm not the only one, there's the director, she would fail. The voice cut him off, again and again. She would fail, because she lacks the will and the strength to succeed. The bush chuckled, I dare say she has already joined the crestfallen. That's not true, she's out there helping. Because her pride demands it. He was interrupted again, not because she seeks to fight against fate, but because it was expected of her. That is her motive. You lack this pride. Forced into a position you were ill-prepared for, neither born with brilliance nor gifted it by the fates. You, half-grown master of humanity, have you what it takes, truly? I've got to. He ground out, I've got to do this. Ah, I see. The voice mused, so that is what drives you, how human. Yes, you have the will, but have you the strength? The bush slowly retreated into the ground as the flames receded. Young human, may we meet again. Ritsuka stood there, staring at the spot where the burning bush had been a few moments ago before he let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding in. Forget sleeping by himself tonight. He once sought to shed the yoke of fate, but failed. Now, he awaits only an answer. I suppose it is no secret who the mystery voice is. So yes. Aldea, scholar of the first sin. He isn't dead, rather, his is an existence similar to Merlin. That is the real, living, Aldea. Manifesting itself in reality, in the same way Merlin does so as well as an illusion. But anyway, here's Aldea's stats, and as promised. The dialogue of Goff and Gwendolyn. Aldea, scholar of the first sin. Servant, Grand Caster. Strength, D. Endurance, A. Agility, E. Mana, A. Luck, B. Noble Phantasm, A. Ancient Dragon, A. Anti-Army, max target, 800, max range. The ultimate in Aldea's attempts to recreate a dragon. However, it itself is not a dragon and therefore does not suffer the same weakness to anti-dragon weapons. However, because it holds the soul of a giant, it is weak to giant slaying skills and weapons. Class skills. Item construction, A. Territory creation, B. Saint graph modification, D. Can alter his size. Independent manifestation, A. Personal skills. Instant movement. A. Aldea lacks conventional movement, so must teleport his body. Inherent insight. A. Pyromancy. A. Undead experiment. A. Aldea is very capable at creating familiars, either out of human corpses or the corpses of animals. Clairvoyance. X. As he exists beyond the confines of time, beyond even the first flame, he observes time in the same way one would observe a roll of film. He can scroll through it at his leisure, but he awaits an answer. For all he can see are endless cycles. Gwyndalan dialogue. Summoning. Servant, Archer. I am Gwyndalan, Prince of Anor Londo and Dark Sun. Thou art blessed to have mine aid. Dialogue 1. Thou art welcome to join me in silence, it is calming. Dialogue 2. Despite mine appearance, I am male. Dialogue 3. Thou should take care, I am a lord and have merely seen fit to deem thee worthy of mine aid. Thou art the servant in this relation. Dialogue 4. If you have nameless king. Quote. Thou art a traitor to father and forsake of thine titles, if only thy were not the only one to show me kindness, perhaps I could hate thee. Dialogue 5. If you have Guinevere. Sister Guinevere is here. That is most surprising, but I would not expect great aid from her, if I were in thine position. She is most skilled at fleeing. Dialogue 6. If you have Quaylog. Ah, so thou did not escape the fire unscathed. I had though thou perished, perhaps it would have been better, but her personality remains unchanged, that is to be thankful for. Dialogue 7. If you have Gorgon. Thou should not so readily compare me, her hair is unruly and grotesque. Dialogue 8. If you have chosen undead. I have been avoiding the undead, for shame. No. I carried out father's commands, there is no shame in that. Dialogue 9. If you have Mordred. Thou art a girl raised as a boy. But, perhaps I do understand thou. The children who seek acknowledgement, only to be spurned. Dialogue 10. If you have Astolfo. You, mortal with the pink hair, were thou also raised as a girl. Dialogue 11. If you have Pontiff Sullivan. There is a deceiver in these halls. Thou should be wary, despite whatever claims he peddles, he is a traitor to his core. Dialogue 12. If you have Aldrich. Quote. I would ask thou remove it, now, please. Dialogue 13. If you have any of the four knights. Ah, this presence, how nostalgic. Dialogue 14. If you have Artemis. Mine equal is, eccentric. But, could I have been, no. It is too late for such thoughts. Dialogue 15. If you have Priscilla. Ah, no. My mistake. Thou reminded me of another. But, I hope thou art happy, Priscilla. Likes. I enjoy tranquility, but if thou were to ask one thing. None enjoy isolation. Hates. I am the moon, hate should not be so openly shown, it should not, why can I not hate? Wish for the Holy Grail. There is nothing the Lord Vessel could grant me, truly, nothing. Bond level 1. Thou art pleasing to work beside, thy hath my gratitude. Blonde level 2. Thou would make for an adequate dark moon night, should thou ever decide to take upon the duty, thou would be most welcome. Blonde level 3. My appearance. I was born under the moon, I lack the gifts of sunlight that my sisters and brother possessed. Thus I was raised as a daughter. Bond level 4. What a cruel joke. Father proclaimed he would only ever have one son, despite all Farum did, despite all my brother betrayed. Father would not rescind his claim. Thus, I knew I would never replace him. Father raised me as a daughter. But he was father, wise in all things, the light of the world itself. Father knew best. Father, knew best. Bond level 5. I obeyed everything, all his commands. I made no complaints. Then he left. He descended to the kiln and burned. But I remained in Anor Londo, as he commanded me, his final words to keep the light in the world. Then they all left, all who stood with father abandoned the city. Guinevere at the first inclination of decline, then the others. But I remained. I obeyed father and for millennia uncountable, I obeyed him command. Ha, he. It didn't even matter in the end. I obeyed father. Me. While all others left and abandoned his grace, only I remained at the end. Why? Why did I preserve it for so long? Why did I? Yes, there was one thing. Those final words, they were the only time he looked me in the eyes and smiled. Birthday. A birthday, thou art older. A time of joy. During an event. Mine ears detect the sound of merriment, I prefer the comfort of silence, but shall take part. First Ascension. The moon shines brightly upon me. I am grateful for thine aid. Second ascension. The power thy bestows upon me is welcome, thou art close to mine true potential. Third ascension. This power I feel, I am closer now to my prime, I thank thee. Fourth ascension. The dark sun of Anor Londo shines brightly, thou art wise to grant me such. Let us depart, summoner, we shall make haste. Hawkeye Goff dialogue. Summoning. Ah, a summoning, how unexpected. Still, thou must be curious, no. I am Goff, a pleasure to meet you. Dialogue 1. Good, Morrow, thou art surprised by mine presence. Yes, these corridors are rather cramped. Dialogue 2. Thou art rather kind to me. HMPH. Ah, I am a giant, 'tis expected of rudeness. Dialogue 3. Master and servant, ah. I am not too sure of that, nor does the wording please me too greatly. Comrades, sounds better, does it not? Dialogue 4. If you have nameless king. Oh, now there is a presence I have not felt in some time. He is rather more mellow than last I recall. Oh, I do not bear him ill will, should that concern thee. He always held respect for my craft, thus I hold him in equal standing. Dialogue 5. If you have Guinevere. Ah, Lady Guinevere is here. I'd advise caution. Why? Well, she is the goddess of fertility. Do not let her know I said that, she has her father's ire. Dialogue 6. If you have Quelaag. Little Quelaag. Is that you? Oh dear. Mock you. I am a giant, little Quelaag. I could never mock anyone. Dialogue 7. If you have Yorm. A king. He is a king. 'Tis most surprising, and to see another giant about, how grand. I shall speak with him at once. Dialogue 8. If you have Sigward. A knight of Katarina has been speaking with me. He is a joyful fellow and I enjoy his company, it seems I am not the only giant friend he has. I am saddened there are not more like him. Dialogue 9. If you have archer servants. A skilled archer art thou. Well, I would not be adverse to a little competition. Dialogue 10. If you have Gwyndolin. Do not let his solemn nature get you, little Gwyndolin always was rather sullen, although, well. I have my pride as a tutor in his archery skill. Dialogue 11. If you have Vendrick. That one. There is something about that one that concerns me greatly, a strange anger I feel when about him, as if there is some crime I am not aware of, how strange. Dialogue 12. If you have Aldrich. Quote. Thou should remove this one. Or I shall. Dialogue 13. If you have any of the four knights. Ah, hello old comrades. Thou art well, yes. Dialogue 14. If you have Artemis. Goddess of the moon, thou says, and the hunt as well. A most novel purpose, although, is that, a toy. Dialogue 15. If you have chosen undead. Ah, the slayer of Calamate. Thou art well this day. Dialogue 16. If you have dragon servants. My bow arm is rather tense, 'tis most unusual, are they crossbreeds? No. Well, I suppose I can leave well enough alone. Likes. Well, dragon slaying, 'tis what gave me purpose, but if you were to ask what I can actually prefer. I enjoy carving, 'tis quite enjoyable. Hates. 'Tis a strong word, but I suppose I have a few points of annoyance, but they aren't worth mentioning. Wish for the Holy Grail. A wish for me, thou says. 'Tis not much for thought. I have little to wish for, well. Perhaps more dragons. I am a dog, after all, I would rather have some hares to hunt. Bond level 1. Asking about me. Well, there's very little to be said. Blonde level 2. Thou art most kind to a mere giant, I thank thee for this. Blonde level 3. My carvings. I would be more than happy to show you how. 'Tis a trivial skill, but I find it quite rewarding. Bond level 4. Ah yes, the story of the pine resin in my helm. Oh, you are surprised I knew of it. I was retired anyway and what is worse to the ignorant than an intelligent giant. Bond level 5. Thou art a fine human, I am most glad to call thee a friend. May every honor be bestowed upon thee. Birthday. A birthday. A fine day indeed then, proud human. During an event. I hear quite the commotion, well. I have never participated in a festival before. I am most curious to see what it is like. First ascension. Well, it seems I am doing my role well to deserve this, my thanks to you. Second ascension. Again, you raise me higher. My thanks to you, proud human. Third ascension. It seems I approach my limit, I must confess my surprise at this development, but I am glad to be of service. Fourth ascension. Thou hast done much for me, my thanks upon thee and I hope that I assure thee, I shall live up to thy expectations. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 37. Grouping Up. Ritska Group Pav. You seem terribly cavalier about this. Quelaag pointed out with a slightly raised eyebrow as Ritska regaled the group with his visitation from the night before. Oh, no. Ritska waved her off with a nervous smile. I'm actually freaking out right now. I was literal told by a burning bush that I'm on the road to become a king. His expression became strained. I'm really not looking to be the next Moses. Romani wheezed, coughing heavily while the servants who were not familiar with the story looked to each other in confusion for a few moments before they dismissed it. My liege, I don't think you realize the implications here. Brindari spoke up in a serious tone of voice. This caster, whom you spoke with, infiltrated the heart out our camp, while over half a dozen servants were present, might I add, completely undetected, and then proceeded to enter your own private quarters, where for over a minute he spoke with you, completely undetected, and then escaped without any of us being aware. He's right. Romani nodded his head gravely as he controlled himself. Fujimaru, only the highest level of presence concealment could accomplish that, for this caster to simply manifest himself in the middle of a group of servants without any of them realizing. If he had any other motives other than to talk with you, he trailed off meaningfully. Ritska remained silent for a few moments before his legs lost their power and he fell on his behind. Oh, why yikes, he panted, that guy, whoa. I could have died, huh? He asked, seemingly to himself, My liege, for the time being I recommend that you remain close by the side of myself or another of the servants, in the event of another appearance of this caster. The shielder offered. He turned to Beatrice and Quelaag. Can either of you two do anything to remedy our lapse in security? Oh, Beatrice winced. I'm not that good at setting up traps or warning fields. What do you want me to do? Quelaag scoffed. Spin a web. Outstanding. Brindari growled. Two witches, admittedly one is a hermit from the woods. Beatrice slumped at the dismissal, but the other is a chaos witch of Izalith, supposedly some of the most powerful and the only thing you are capable of is spewing flames. Pyromancer, you dullard. Quelaag hissed. Pyromancer. Not sorcerer. You want magic that can alert you to people in any direction. Summon Seath or some other caster. Maybe you should have brought the caster made of kindling, he might have been of some meager use to you. What's done is done. Ash interjected before another fight could break out. For the time being, we are at least aware that this caster poses you no harm. He gestured to Ritska as Mash helped him back to his feet, and I suspect he would be an extraordinarily talented one to manage such a feat. So, Ritska replied, a nervous tinge in his voice, he doesn't want to kill me. For the moment, I would say no. Ash nodded, but, Esser Brindari does raise a good point. It would be wise for us to position a servant near you at all times. Mash. Arash coughed into his hands, not so subtly with an amused expression. The girl blinked at her name being called out. She and Ritska turned to each other with wide eyes and then back to the group. Wait, I can't. The suggestion has merit. Brindari cupped his chin. Squire Kyrilight is one of the more durable servants here, opposed to myself, and would be able to occupy an assassin long enough for the rest of us to be notified. He slowly nodded his head. However, her status as a demi-servant means she still requires sleep. I would not be against offering my own services. Cecilia spoke up. The group turned to her as she sat on a nearby log. Fu curled up on her lap as she stroked the white animal. Mine senses were keener to balance my lack of sight. Should violence emerge, the shadow of Milord can stand guard. So, Master is going to sleep with Mash and Cecilia then? Gareth asked, tilting her head innocently. Dead silence followed her question. I most certainly hope not. Ash replied, crossing his arms and staring at Ritska. The master was caught between the blood rushing to his face at Gareth's poor wording and the blood desperately attempting to leave it at the glare he could feel Ash bore into him through the helmet. What? Gareth looked around, confused as to the awkward atmosphere. What did I say? Wording, kid. Arash pat her on the shoulder. Wording. In the meantime, Romani coughed into his hand, trying to shift the topic of the conversation back on track. You should be joining up with the remnants of Vespasian's legion soon. From the location Solaire provided, they're camped about 30 miles from you. Right. Ritska jumped at the change in topic with a thankful look in his eyes. Let's get breakfast and get going. Doctor. The man turned his head towards Mash. Has there been any news on the director? Still nothing. Romani sighed. We've been trying to, He suddenly gaped and stared at something. Her signal just appeared again. And, whoa. These readings of divinity. They're even higher than the writer in the France Singularity. Found the god then, did she? Ritska asked, can we? I don't know, he shrugged, call her. Ah, right, yes. Romani enthusiastically nodded, I'll do that now. There was a tense silence for a few moments as a second screen popped up next to Romani's. For a few seconds it was nothing but static, then it cleared up to reveal that the director was situated on a beach, although the first voice to speak was not hers. Spell of Farseeing. An effeminate voice called out in confusion, most quaint. Thee uses this for communing. Why yes. Olga replied, obviously a little nervous. Ritska and Mash blinked at the tonal shift in her voice from the usual confident, if often irritated, director. Intriguing. The screen panned around to reveal the androgynous appearance of a figure in a white dress with a seven-pointed star-shaped golden crown on their head. These art thy companions. He figure cocked their head at them. Most ordinar. Gwyndolin. Quelaag called out from behind them, is that you? The figure suddenly sputtered, looking far more disheveled than they had a moments ago. Lady Quelaag. What are? They turned off screen, presumably at Olga. They did not state that Lady Quelaag was amongst the well. Olga sounded continually nervous as Quelaag marched her way over to the screen and leant down towards it. Gwyndolin. Quelaag raised an eyebrow. What are you doing? What is that voice you are putting on? I do, Gwyndolin coughed. I am unaware as to what thee refers to. A soft giggle emerged from behind Gwyndolin as another figure leaned out from behind the god. This one was only slightly shorter than him, with long purple hair, a white dress with black highlights and an amused smile on her face. What's this? Steno asked in a teasing manner. The whole time you've been here, you haven't cracked once, and yet the second this woman appears you suddenly bite your tongue. I was merely surprised as the appearance of Lady Quelaag. Gwyndolin replied, finding his confidence again, 'tis had been many years since we had spoken. Because you all thought I was dead. Quelaag bluntly pointed out, to which Gwyndolin flinched. Then your father sent his armies into Izalith to wipe it out. Surely thee understands that the outbreak of demons. Oh, I'm not angry about the attack. Quelaag dismissed. I'm angry it failed. She curled her lip in disgust. Great lord of sunlight indeed, routed by mere beasts. Gwyndolin bristled at the comment but eventually relaxed their shoulders. Thy tongue has only gotten sharper. Lady Quelaag. Gwyndolin spoke in a softer tone of voice, almost nostalgic. And you've gotten more dour. Quelaag replied with a frown and narrowed eyes, you feel older. Ah, Gwyndolin gave a quiet chuckle. In truth, 'tis many an age since I last saw you. Until this moment, I had forgotten even thy face. Quelaag's face changed from annoyed to mildly concerned within the blink of an eye. Gwyndolin. The time for reunions is not yet upon us. Gwyndolin composed himself again, turning their attention to Ritska. Thou art the subordinate to the human, Olga. You Ritska coughed and nodded his head, yes. Fujimaru Ritska. Thee should be grateful to thy lord. Gwyndolin spoke down to him, she hast secured mine aid and the aid of Esargoth. Oh. Quelaag chuckled, so that cantankerous oaf is lumbering about. Thee speaketh most harshly for one whom would demand a carving from the oaf ragu. Ah. Quelaag changed into a flustered state in a moment, causing most of the servants to stare at her in naked amusement. You've been alone too long. That never happened. She glared at Arash, get that damn smirk off your face. The archer servant covered his mouth and looked away, eyes still flooded with mirth. Quelaag growled at him before she returned to staring at Gwyndolin. So, you're coming here then, are you? Shortly. He responded, conjuring transport takes precedence. Goth cannot fit in their current boat. This is pretty good work you've done, director. Romani praised, securing the help of a god like this is amazing. Oh, of course. Olga nodded her head, smiling triumphantly and placing a hand on her chest. It's only natural. Did your negotiations with Dal take place before or after your rather fearful episode? Steno asked mischievously, a teasing smile on her face as Olga sputtered and scowled at the goddess. The purple-haired deity sighed, regardless, I'm afraid I cannot do much. I'm quite useless in combat. Gwyndolin stared at her, thou art remaining behind then. I am. Steno confirmed, I'm not cut out for all that nasty work, prefer to let someone do it for me. Gwyndolin stared at her for a few moments before he let out a near imperceptible sigh of resignation. Very well. The sentinel illusions shall stand guard for you, he responded after a few moments. Steno gave him a small pat on the arm. Oh. Concerned about me that much are you? You didn't look the caring type. Apologies. Gwyndolin's lip twitched upwards into a sad smile. Thou were nostalgic. I'm sure we'll meet again. Stano hummed, maybe you shall meet. Myself, and my little sister. Perhaps. He turned away from her and back to the screen. Thou shalt await my arrival. Nero's head popped up in front of him, causing the god to send her a frown of annoyance. Await our glorious return. The screen cut off, leaving the group dumbfounded. Ritska stared at it for a few moments before he looked at Romani. Well, at least we have help now. Yeah. Romani chuckled. There is that. I'm just glad the director is alright. He gave a relieved smile. In the meantime, you should probably get ready to move out. The problem of this singularity won't fix itself. Yeah, Ritska groaned. Not looking forward to fighting the nasty weird things again. Olga Group Pav. Gwendolyn waved his hand. A few hundred meters out at sea, the air began to shimmer as the distinct form of a ship slowly began to manifest itself. Nearly twice the size of the one they had been sailing before and far more intricate in its design. The dual masts with perfect white sails, mounted on the front was the shape of a man, long-bearded with his sword pointed downwards. Of course. Sullivan groaned when he caught sight of the statue on the front of the ship, because Gwyn did not receive enough lascivious praise in life. Thee should speak with care. 'Tis only because I stay mine own hand that thee still lives. Gwendolyn gave a swift rebuttal as his arms spread wide. Olga gaped as a large golden circle manifested beneath them. Wah! She opened her mouth to ask what he was doing, only to find her feet no longer on the sand and instead on planks of well-polished wood. She gaped and looked around, finding that she and everyone else had been transported onto the boat. Gwendolyn lowered his arms, showing a slight tremble to them. To think it would be this strenuous, he muttered under his breath before he straightened out his posture, turning to the Nero and speaking with confidence again, thou has a destination. Nero beamed, this is most impressive, as expected of a god. She turned back to Gwendolyn, ah, yes. Sail north. We shall meet with our compatriots along the coast. I had not considered that I would find myself at sea. Goff rumbled in amusement as he stared at the ocean with crossed arms, 'tis surprisingly relaxing. Ah, I only ever crossed the sea once before this. Solaire replied to him, standing next to the giant, coming to Lordran from Astora was quite the journey. Suppose it would be. Goff nodded along, I confess some excitement to meet with Quelaag again. The giant gave another quiet chuckle, 'twas many a season since I had seen her last. Still, even with this, throne of heroes I had not thought to see her again. There are many surprises. Solaire replied with a nostalgic tone, I had not thought to meet another of the Sunlight Covenant. He nodded his head slowly, especially one who had met the patron lord. Twould be best to keep that out of Lord Gwendolyn's ear. Goff warned, the young lord suffered much. And holds onto a great many a grudge against those who left. So long ago, even after death. Solaire hummed, yes. Although should he decide to aid this Chaldea in the future, it might prove problematic, considering the patron already requested to be summoned as well. Yes, I can see that proving quite the conundrum. Goff sighed, but, perhaps for the best. Lord Gwendolyn always did hold his siblings in high regard. Still, Solaire chuckled, shaking his head, to think I would be stood next to one of the four great knights. Truly, this is a blessing from the sun. Oh, I'm merely an archer. Goff waved him off, thou would find me better suited to hunting dragons. Well, I'm participated in a dragon hunt myself. Solaire scratched the back of his helm, quite different to what one would imagine, it converted its body into a mouth. Oh, sounds quite ferocious. Goff rumbled, you slew it, did you not? With aid from a good friend of mine. Solaire replied, we did, quite the challenging task it was too, but jolly cooperation saw us through in the end. Dragon hunting. Knighthood's highest calling. Goff let out a low chuckle, and to think I may get the chance, with my body in its prime, 'tis a most wondrous feeling. Ritska Group Pav. Scouts came back about 5 minutes ago. Aulus reported to Ritska and Vrindari, said the nearest town had been laid waste to incursions of the spiders so close. Vrindari asked, cupping the chin of his helmet, this seems a bold play, could they have already destroyed the legate's legion? The scouts said that the damage done was different to the spiders. Aulus hesitantly replied, they said that the bodies had been gathered up and mutilated. What? Ritska blinked, mutilated. How so? Well, they were ripped apart, sir. Aulus gave a shrug, that's what they said, no sign of any spiders either. No webs, no tunnels and no cocoons. Perhaps it is another of this fiend's creatures. Vrindari crossed his arms, the beasts we encountered did not seem to bear much similarities to the spiders, my liege. Ritska bit his lip, turning to Vrindari, do you think we should check it out? It is your choice. The knight replied, however, it would not be too grand a detour for some servants to investigate it while the cohort continues its march. Right, Ritska nodded, turning back to Aulus, were there any survivors? None. The man shook his head, or if there were, they aren't there anymore. All right. Ritska gave a tired sigh as he rubbed his forehead, you can, I'll return to the men, sir. He nodded to Ritska and Vrindari before turning on his heel and departing. You seem troubled. Vrindari pointed out, does something concern you, my liege? Yeah, I think I might be getting desensitized to being told people are dead, he said in a mirthless chuckle, God. I hope not. That is an unfortunate part of bearing the mantle of leader, my liege. The looking glass knight offered, I cannot help you in coping with it. I was raised to fulfill the role of soldier of the kingdom, I grew accustomed to the prospect of death rapidly, as did my comrades. Yeah, I'm not much of a knight. Ritska mumbled out. No, I admit, as you are, my liege, you would make for a poor squire. He bluntly put, however, I'm sure with time you will grow accustomed to the role. Are you telling me to get used to people dying? It would be for the best. Vrindari replied, then sighed, however, I can see that look in your eye. I apologize if I have offended you or overstepped my bounds. Perhaps another would be better suited to discussing this with. In the meantime, do you have recommendations for the scouting party? Why yeah. Ritska coughed out, Ash, Gareth and Sif. They are the fastest amongst us and Ash is pretty versatile. Very well. I shall inform them. Because it's still bothering me. Gareth replied, frowning as she stared at the firekeeper in the distance. It's weird, surely someone would have noticed. Quote. Didn't you have a wife? Gareth froze, well. Lioness was, she was, we were. Arash hummed as the lancer froze, idly staring over the arrow in his hand with faux interest as he was caught between hiding his amusement and the smile that threatened to split his face. Oh. Ash blinked, looking up, his helmet off and revealing his intrigued expression, you were married. Well, it was expected of a knight. Gareth sputtered, and she was a very close friend. Very close. Arash nodded dutifully, of course. Why yes, exactly. Gareth smiled, and she was a very pretty girl and, oh, you're teasing me aren't you? Arash snickered, really, I don't see much of an issue. He replied, so what if King Arthur of this world was a woman? From what I gather, she did virtually exactly the same thing as the King Arthur who was a man. But, Gareth slumped in her chair, it means that, no one really noticed what was wrong. Not worth thinking about now. Ash cut her off, what's done is done. Did your king ever appear bothered by it? Well, no. They didn't really show all that much emotion. Gareth replied, well, except irritation, but that was only when Merlin was around. Court wizard, yes. Ash nodded, was there an issue with him? Half incubus. Arash interjected, famous trickster too. Quote. Incubus. Ah, type of sexual demon. Quote. Oh. Ash blinked. I see. He furrowed his brow and then looked back at Gareth, did he look human? Yes. Gareth nodded her head slowly, why wouldn't he? Ash slowly turned his head in the direction of Quelaag. Arash and Gareth followed his gaze to the Chaos Witch. Oh, right. Gareth coughed, why yes. Merlin looked human. She nodded, completely. Well, that must have been nice. He replied, very accepting kingdom, was it? Well, there were a lot of fairies living in the wilds. Gareth replied, especially in the countryside. Occasionally you would get some black dogs or maybe a giant you'd have to deal with. A giant. Ash blinked, you killed giants. Well, not me personally. She replied with an awkward scratch of the back of her neck, mainly the other round table knights. I'm sure you were a part of the action too. Arash offered, turning to Ash, why? You ever kill giants? A couple. He replied, mainly in Irithyll. I also made friends with one. Oh. Must have been nice. Wasn't much of a conversationalist, but he was good help. He replied, big bow too. Arrows the size of trees. He huffed, of course we are apparently going to receive aid from Hawkeye Goff himself, so that is something. Famous as he. Hawkeye Goff is probably the most well-known archer in Londor. Ash replied, even countless millennia after the fall of Gwyn's kingdom, the stories of his 4 great knights continue on. Goff was a giant who fought during the war against the everlasting dragons. As you can imagine, a giant armed with a bow was quite the archer. Arash gave a slow blink as his eyes gradually widened. I see. Yeah, that'll probably do it. He turned away chuckling in disbelief. A giant armed with a bow. This I have to see. Closest I assume I got was the giant residing in the undead settlement. Ash shrugged, but yes. Goff and Gwyndolin, he paused at the last name, well. Yorshka spoke highly of him, I suppose. Problem. Well, last time I encountered him was in a precarious position. How bad? Half-eaten. Ew. Gareth's face soured. That's disgusting. More so for me, considering I is standing in sludge. Ash grumbled, still, I am surprised Sullivan is still alive, considering Gwyndolin was the one he betrayed. He shrugged, well. I doubt he trusts him, but I can at least rest easier knowing there is another prepared for the caster's treachery. Suppose there is that. Arash mused, then looked over his shoulder as someone approached. Morning Vrindari. Morning Bowman Arash. Vrindari nodded back to him, then turned to face Ash and Gareth. Our liege has ordered you two to take Sif and investigate a nearby town east of here. It was wiped out. It doesn't point towards spiders, but our liege would like to be sure. Understood. Ash nodded, standing up and manifesting his helm over his head, slowly turning to Gareth. Come then, let us grab the wolf and be on our way. Coming big bro. I mean Ash. Gareth cringed. Sorry, it's a little confusing. Well, I cannot change my appearance. Ash shrugged, I'm sure we will get used to it. Yeah. Gareth nodded along, I'm sure I'll get used to it. But really, how coincidental that a person with Big Brother Gawain's face is friends with someone who shares King Arthur's face. Now that you mention it, that's a little strange. Arash mused, probably fate or something like that. I'm not one to believe in preordained destiny. Ash waved his hand, if I did I wouldn't exactly be here. That sounds like a story and a half. Arash chuckled, but another time, I suppose. You'd best be on your way. Indeed. Ash nodded, turning away and moving off towards the direction of Sif, Gareth trailing behind him with a wide grin on her face. Ritska Pav. Are you alright, Senpei? Mash asked as she looked at him from her own mount. The master was tightly gripping the reins of the horse he was riding so hard that his knuckles had gradually turned white. Why yeah, Ritska nervously replied, just, never rode a horse before, kind of scared of falling off. I'm sure you'll do great, Senpei. Mash cheered, you've already gotten this far without falling off. Yeah, Beatrice cheered alongside the shielder, you've done better than me. Never rode a horse before then. Arash asked the caster, the woman shook her head. You didn't get too many animals alive in Lordran, or if you did I never saw them. She shrugged, that and if there were any cities or towns that hadn't fallen to ruin, they probably wouldn't sell them to me. Why? Mash asked. Quelaag scoffed in the background. Heretic witch or undead. Take your pick. You'd probably be right on both accounts. The chaos witch interjected with a bored expression. Well, not that I could complain too much. Beatrice replied with a wave of her hand. I'm used to working off scraps, that and I count myself luck I was able to avoid an asylum. She saw the minor looks of confusion in the faces of those present before she elaborated, basically where they dumped all the undead. Oh. Ritska nodded in understanding, then frowned, dump them. They didn't try to help them. Quelaag laughed loudly at that, even Beatrice allowed herself a small smile. Ha! Quelaag's chuckles died down as she stared at Ritska as if he were a child that was helping them. She dismissed with a wave of her hand, just dump them all in some far-off place and call it a day. That doesn't sound like it solves the problem. Ritska frowned, and it seems a little cruel. Crueler when you consider that the curse of undeath could spontaneously appear on anyone. Beatrice offered with a minor shrug, go to sleep one day, wake up the next with the brand of the dark sign on you. Then they just took you to an asylum. Mash looked aghast, but it's not their fault. It's not worth thinking about too heavily. Beatrice shrugged, most drove themselves crazy trying to cure it. I just focused on other things at the time. Still, that seems, Ritska cut himself off as he stared off at something, slowly nodding his head and furrowing his brows. Something wrong, Senpei? Mash asked. Ritska turned to her with a sober look, then to Quelaag and Beatrice. Have either of you two heard of a dark wraith before? Ash, Gareth and Sif Pav. I've sent the warning to Master. Ash responded as he stared down at the body. The torso had the mark of a hand burned into it, the surrounding skin near the mark had been desiccated and the features of the corpse were gaunt. You're sure you know what did this? Gareth asked with a concerned expression. Sif was still growling at the surrounding area. Having been on the receiving end of dark hand before, I can. He nodded, slowly standing up, then gestured at Sif. His reaction only confirms it. How dangerous are they? Dark wraiths in terms of strength are monstrous. Ash replied, not quite my physical equal, but close enough to it. However, they rarely travel alone. Their true power, he pointed at the body, is this. They consumed the humanity of these villagers. So, they ate their souls. In effect. Ash nodded, looking around. However, what concerns me is the placement. What do you mean? The bodies are all dumped here. He gestured at the pile. A dark wraith would merely rip the humanity from your body and leave it where it fell. No. This is the work of Dark Hand, but perhaps, he hummed in thought, we may be dealing with a servant instead. In which case, one who was affiliated with the Covenant of Dark Wraiths. How bad then? Depends. If it is an invading dark wraith using a red-eye orb, they are already long gone and, as such, beyond our ability to chase down. He stared back at the bodies. Either way, we have confirmed the presence of more than spiders here. He crossed his arms. However, whether they are linked to Aldrich is unknown to me. Sounds pretty in line with what we've seen so far. No, the Darkwraith Covenant existed long before the Devourer. Ash replied, he trailed off, staring at the pile again. Gareth. Do you notice something odd here? What do you mean? The Lancer asked, walking up next to him and souring her expression at the corpses, is there something wrong? Quote. Where are the children? What? The Lancer turned to him as Ash walked towards the pile. Wait. There aren't any here. It's just the adults. Indeed. Ash responded, meaning they were taken, in which case it would point towards Aldrich. Ash nodded, turning around and walking back towards the saber while Gareth followed after him. Sif, are there any close by? The wolf took another sniff of the air before it growled but shook its head. Any scent of the children? Again, another shake of the head. Ash and Gareth furrowed their brows at the wolf. So, they just disappeared. Gareth responded with a tilt of her head. Can they do that? Aldrich was capable of short-range teleportation. Ash replied, but it would have been obvious if he were here. He sighed, there is something else going on here. Regardless, we have determined what occurred here was the work of Darkwraiths, which may be affiliated with Aldrich, but we cannot be certain. Better to be prepared for it, in case they are though, right? Gareth asked. Ash nodded his head in response. Indeed. Ash responded, in any event, our work here is done. We had best return to the others, they will likely be approaching the remnants of Vespasian and the new servant. Right. Gareth beamed, nodding her head, although I've never heard of a foreigner class before. She wondered, then again, I've never heard of a shielder class either, so it might just be a new thing. I've only been a servant for a short time and my knowledge is limited when it comes to this situation. The unkindled gave a hapless shrug. Then again, charging blindly into a new situation is the hallmark on being undead. So I suppose there is little change from what I did before this. At least you're comfortable. Gareth offered with a half-smile. Ash chuckled. Well, there is that. Ritska Group Pa 1 hour later. The master felt sweat forming on his brow as he was stared down by the servant in front of him. Mash was protectively stood by his side. They had finally been able to join up with Vespasian's legion. Finding out that nearly half had been wiped out was a serious blow to morale, but when they were told that the emperor had been able to get the help of a god and a giant, Vespasian had merely chuckled and said that it sounded like the sort of thing the emperor could do. It then led to a situation where he had been introduced to the servant who had saved them. The foreigner who went by the name of Lucian. Who was starting to unnerve Ritska with his blank stare. The servant was dressed in what looked like clothes from Victorian Britain, a long black leather coat, dark linen shirt underneath, a black bandana covering the bottom half of his face and an arrow-shaped hat on his head. The man had merely stared at Ritska after he made his introduction and hadn't said a word since. Quote. You're young. He eventually spoke. His voice was heavily accented, however it was surprisingly quiet, almost gentle to it. Why yeah. Ritska scratched the back his head neck. S16, well. 17 next week. This is no place for boys. Ritska winced. Not much choice. Not enough of you. No. The man slowly nodded his head. I'm Lucian. A hunter of beasts. Fujimaru Ritska, I'm a master of Chaldea. The boy nodded back, then gestured for Mash to introduce herself. The girl blinked at the sudden attention before she straightened herself out. Mash Kyrielite. Demi-servant. Lucian's head slowly turned to her, scanning her up and down. You're young too. He replied. Hunt is no place for children. He sighed, a long and exasperated one. No choice though. He turned back to Ritska, I'm not here to help you with your errant clergyman. Ritska furrowed his brows. You aren't. No. He shook his head. I'm here on my own business, it happens to coincide with yours. There's a beast here. Attacked this lot several days ago. The thing Soler San described. Mash guessed, you were summoned to deal with it. Lucian made a noise of affirmation. I'm here because, he suddenly looked away from them. His head twitched as if something was speaking to him before he slowly tensed his shoulders, then sent a small glance in Ritska's direction. The barest hint of pity passed through his eyes before they became blank again. Turns out I might be of aid to you. He responded after a few moments, I can kill the beast. Leave the rest up to you. By yourself? Mash asked worriedly, isn't that a dangerous? No. I've slain beasts before. This is no different. He replied in an even tone, not sounding offended by the question of his skill in the least. He slowly turned back to Ritska, rising from his seating position. It's an offer of partnership. Ritska raised an eyebrow and tilted his head. Why the sudden change? Advisement. Lucian responded, from a close source. Oh. K. He slowly nodded his head, not quite understanding but thinking nothing of it before he extended his hand to the hunter, happy to work with you. The hunter stared at the outstretched limb before he grunted, nothing worth being happy about in this situation. He reached out and clasped it in a firm handshake, but hunts are never joyous. Ritska wasn't quite sure how to respond to that, so he kept his face blank and nodded his head slowly, eyes briefly darting to Mash, conveying his feeling of being at a loss. The Shielder's servant met his eyes and offered a tiny shrug, convincing him that she wasn't sure either. Fujimaru. Romani's voice came up. Lucian released his grip on the boy's hand and raised his eyebrow slightly, showcasing a mild sense of intrigue as the doctor's face popped up. We were detecting another servant near your loca. Oh. He blinked when he saw the hunter. Never mind, they're right there. Lucian stared at the doctor, squinting his eyes with a particular intensity that had the man shift in his chair. Fujimaru. The doctor whispered, this servant is looking at me funny. No. Lucian went back to a blank expression, it's nothing. My mistake. He looked the doctor up and down, then looked back at Ritska, your allies, I assume. Yes. Ritska nodded, this is Dr. Romani from Chaldea. It is a privilege to meet you, honored Heroi. Why is he talking like that? Lucian grunted, cocking his head to the side, are all your allies bootlickers, or is it just him? Romani slumped in his chair, I can't even be nice to them anymore. Did you need something, doctor? Mash asked. Romani jolted in his seat before turning facing her direction. Yes, the director says she's close to your location, well. Closer than she was. He chuckled, oddly enough, the god can't conjure a speedboat. God. Lucian furrowed his brows, what manner of god do you? He trailed off as his eyes caught sight of something behind them, suddenly intensifying. Ritska and Mash followed his gaze to see him glaring at Quelaag, the chaos which completely ignorant to the murderous glare being directed at her. As quickly as it came, it vanished. The hunter relaxing his body again, Don't smell the beast blood in her, odd. He grumbled, then looked back at the pair to see them giving him wide-eyed looks of shock. What? Nothing. Ritska gulped. HMPH. Lucian shook his head, turning his eyes back to Romani, God. Divine Spirit. Romani elaborated. Like an old one. A what one? Romani furrowed his brows, like Lovecraft. Who? I don't think that they are an eldritch monstrosity. Ritska awkwardly answered, he looked human to me. Huh, Lucian blinked, never mind then. Sir. Aulu's voice brought their attention over to the Centurion, your compatriots have returned from their scouting mission. Good. Ritska nodded, then turned back to the hunter, seeing his blank stare. Monsters attacked village, consumed souls. The fuck? And, the good hunter arrives. You know what that means, don't you? Stats and dialogue. Good hunter, Lucian. Servant, foreigner. Strength, C. Endurance, D. Agility, B. Mana, B. Luck, C. Noble Phantasm, EA. Hunter's Workshop, EA. Holds the hunter's weapons and items, can be withdrawn through help of the messengers. The Dream, B. Anti-unit max target, 1, max range, 5. Pulls target into the hunter's dream, or rather into the moon presence's domain. Without strong mental fortitude, they fall victim to the old one's madness. Class skills. Existence outside the domain, B. Divinity, C. Direct servant of the moon presence. Personal skills. Carol runes. Runes of the Old Ones, a language none can understand save their wielder, however, that does not disregard their potency or deadly nature. Beast Hunter. A. Insight. A. That which is seen, cannot be unseen. Immune to mental pollution. The Old Blood. B. Similar effect to a madness enhancement, however the bloodlust will continue until they or their opponent is dead, similarly, doing damage to their opponent restores their own wounds. Old Hunter Bone. B. Adds a modifier to speed and shrouds form in fog in short bursts. Keeper of the Dream. B. Moon Presence Direct Envoy, and it has little patience for other Old Ones. When battling foreigners and others of eldritch origin, is more effective. Understanding of Anatomy. B. It's easier to kill something if you know what makes it work. Has an adequate grasp of the living bodies of most creatures, would make a capable field surgeon. Summoning. Servant. Foreigner. I am here on behalf of the Moon Presence, I am Lucian, a hunter. What beasts need slaying? Dialogue 1. Free time is a new one. Didn't have too much of that after becoming a hunter, still don't have it. Dialogue 2. I'm not like the other servants here, obviously, not quite alive either. Just think of me as a waking dream. Dialogue 3. Master and servant. I'm merely on loan here. But I am glad you do not act as a master. Dialogue 4. If you have Giles de Raiz Caster. Moon-cursed idiot doesn't know what he's doing. He raises that book near me, I'll have his head. Dialogue 5. If you have divine spirits. Quote. Actual gods. Never thought I'd see one. Dialogue 6. If you have Atalanta. That woman, with the ears of a cat. I nearly shot her on instinct yesterday. I know she isn't a beast but, still strange to see. Dialogue 7. If you have Thomas Edison. Quote. Never seen something like that. Head of a lion. Didn't have any beast blood too, strange. Dialogue 8. If you have any of the Tamamo 9. Quote. What the? Saw a woman with a fox tail in the kitchen. Something wrong with this place. Dialogue 9. If you have Abigail Williams. Wish she wouldn't follow me around. Keeps calling me big brother as well. Ah, right, you can't see it, can you? I envy that. Dialogue 10. If you have Katashika Hokusai. Sorry, wasn't looking where I was. What is that, on your? By the moon. Dialogue 11. If you have Jacques de Molay. There are many old ones in the sky, as bad as I claim my owner is. There are worse I could be subject to. Dialogue 12. If you have Ludwig, the Holy Blade. You seem sane. Don't worry, if that noble phantasm is used. I'll be sure to put you down. Dialogue 13. If you have Mysterious Heroine XX. Another emissary of. Get that damn spear out of my face. Think you're playing at. Foreigner hunting. You bungler. I am the hunter of old ones. Dialogue 14. If you have Artemis. I feel a connection with her. Goddess of the moon you say. That explains it. Well, mine isn't as eccentric as that one. Dialogue 15. If you have Voyager. Went to the moon, that's not somewhere I would travel willingly. But, he's not a bad child. Even the moon presence is indifferent to him. Dialogue 16. If you have Yang Guifei. I feel a sense of companionship with you, we both attracted the loving attention of one of them. I pity your sorry soul. Dialogue 17. If you have Gehrman. He looks more lively than I remember, but I see the way he stares at me. He shouldn't blame himself, I took this role. To see him free of the dream. I can live with it. Dialogue 18. If you have counter-guardian servants. I feel an odd sense of kinship with them. I feel it is one none should ever share. Slaves to something greater, still. I suspect we all made our choice. Likes. Don't have much time for those. Suppose there might have been something some time ago, can't remember it. Hates. Beasts. They come in all forms. Those who lose themselves to their base instincts, who become naught but animals. I really can't stand them. Wish for the Holy Grail. I just want to wake up. Bond level 1. I'm a hunter. I'm just here because my master ordered me to help out. Nothing more. Blonde level 2. Strange that you seem to favor me so. Why is that? Not much in the way of personality. Blonde level 3. I kill things. Man and beast alike. That's all I'm good for. There really isn't much to speak with me about. Bond level 4. Quote. Strange one you are. To try and become so close with a hunter, still, your choice. Just don't expect too much to come out of it. Bond level 5. I lied. I'm here to help, but also because my owner has taken an interest in you. I pity you, you sorry bastard. But, I remember what it was like to feel. Thank you, you've made me feel a little bit human. Even if I'll eventually go back, return to the dream. I'll remember you. Thank you, truly. Birthday. A birthday, growing old, yes. I did such a thing, treasure the years as they pass you by, you'll soon forget how many have. During an event. Awful ruckus going on out there, best investigate. First ascension. Strange doing this again, doesn't even need blood echoes. Second ascension. I can hear something a little, I feel different than before. Ascension. Yes, Third ascension. I find myself closer in strength to being back home, but I'm closer to, never mind. I'm still me. Fourth ascension. Yerman. Doll. I can't. I'm still in the dream, please. I don't want to. I want to wake. The night blocks all sight. Somebody, anybody, help me, please. Chapter 38. Preparations for departure. Servants Pav. Lucian sat opposite Cecilia, staring at her with a perfectly blank expression as he took a whetstone over his serrated machete. The firekeeper remained perfectly calm in the face of the somewhat unknown servant. An almost nostalgic tinge in the air was palpable for the both of them in regards to the silence. "Thee reminds me of Milord." Cecilia spoke after a few moments. Lucian paused briefly, his hollow eyes flickered over her and then down to his weapon. "You remind me of a friend," he replied. "Well, guardian or caretaker would be a better word, I suppose." He looked over to Ash, the servant leaning up against a tree and staring across the camp. Quote. He has the air of someone cursed and all. As dith thee. Cecilia softly responded. Lucian have a mirthless grunt. Doesn't surprise me how we can all recognize each other for that. He shook his head, placing his hacksaw blade on the ground. The weapon seemed to sink into shadow and out of existence, some old saying about taking one to know one. Is mine own presence uncomfortable for thee? Quote. No. He shook his head, she's not gone. Suppose there is comfort to know that all us blood-cursed fools have someone there. I mean, it's a pretty big bow. Arash gestured to the weapon lying on the ground. He had a wry smile on his face as he stared at it. How far can you shoot with it? Distance is little concern. Goff waved his hand. In your measurements. Perhaps 100 leagues. Arash whistled, slowly nodding his head. Well, I suppose that distance makes sense considering. Well, he gestured to the giant with a smile. That's some pretty impressive range. I can manage at least 20 kilometers. More if I use my noble phantasm, but I wouldn't be around to fire off anything after using it. Oh. It kills me. I see. 'Tis unfortunate, although thee does not seem saddened by it. Arash shrugged, giving a carefree smile. Nothing to be sad about. He nodded back. How fast can you fire? Oh. I prefer to make sure I can hit my targets. Goff chuckled, although I have never had to compete on speed before. The giant mused, slowly nodding his head, then looking down. Perhaps 3 at once. If we speak consecutively. Perhaps 100 in a minute. Arash slowly turned his head to stare at the bow, then thought about the size of the arrows that the weapon would take before he laughed, shaking his head. Well, when you are firing off the type of arrows I think you are, you probably don't need that many. He scratched the back of his neck. My arrows are just normal-sized ones. Oh, but thou has nimbler hands. Goff pointed out, gesturing with his carving knife before returning to the small item he was working on. Thee can loose more arrows than I, canst thou not? Well, there is that. Arash acknowledged, I could probably do 10,000 if I really put my mind to it. Goff stopped carving, craning his head to look down at the man. 'Tis a grand number. Mine wouldn't pack as much punch as yours. Arash waved his hand. They're good arrows but they are just regular old arrows. He remained silent for a few moments before a good-natured smile came to his face. How about a competition? About in archery? Goff guessed. Arash nodded his head in affirmative. When we go and fight the big guy responsible for this. A little friendly competition between archers. Goff let out a deep and amused chuckle before he nodded his head. If even half of thy claims hold truth to them, 'twould be a most grand competition indeed. Very well, proud human. Hawkeye Goff accepts thy challenge with good spirits and open arms. Masters Pav. The Legion is at half strength, my emperor. Vespasian explained with a despondent expression. The attack on the city caught us by surprise and whatever that thing was, it wiped us out before most could get to their feet. This is most troubling. Nero nodded back, a frown on her face as her green eyes narrowed. They have not attempted to pursue. There have been no attacks since. Vespasian affirmed, however, I fear that they are merely biding their time. Why did they stop though? Ritska asked. Looking at the pair, the heads of everyone in the room turned to him. He felt his mouth go dry and he licked his lips. Sorry. It's just that, well, you basically said they had you on the ropes and then they just let you escape. Vespasian frowned at the interruption but slowly nodded his head. No. You were right. Even with Prefect Solaire and the Traveler, they could have still wiped us out. He sighed, rubbing his palm over his forehead. It doesn't make any logical sense as to why they would not press their advantage. Unless, Olga stepped towards the table, looking down at the map of the region with a fixated expression. She pointed towards Valencium. They advanced here, attacked you and Saber, but when they routed you, they went no further. Indeed. Vespasian nodded, then frowned. You suspect something? I do. Olga nodded her head, flashing up the communicator. Romani. Yo. Instead of the doctor, Carrie was on the monitor. The brunette woman blinked as she stared at the assembled group, her legs resting on the desk. She quickly took them off, folding her arms together and doing her best to look as composed and dignified as possible. She coughed into her fist. I mean, this is Chaldea Command. How can we help you, Director? Ritska snickered into his hand. Mash herself was looking no better as she bit her lip to contain the small smile she had. The master fell silent as the murderous glare Olga sent his way while Mash immediately changed her expression back to being perfectly blank. The pale woman stared at them for a few more moments in irritation before she turned back to the hologram. Where is the doctor? He went to the cafeteria. Carrie scratched the back of her neck and chuckled. He was hungry. Where's Da Vinci? In her workshop. Carrie nodded once, then fell silent as the director stared at her. The woman eventually blinked in realization. Oh, you want me to get her? No. Yes. All right. Carrie fumbled out of the chair, sprinting out of the room leaving behind an empty seat spinning around in circles. Olga exhaled slowly, closing her eyes, some part of her hoping that the childish trick of merely pretending no one else was in the room would in some way diminish the feeling of embarrassment she was feeling at the state of Chaldea. Is everyone at Chaldea like this, or do you simply feel it best to use gestures as a presenting yourselves? Sullivan's dry comment immediately killed any hope of that plan working. Really, she shouldn't have been surprised in the least at this point. It's not that bad. Ritska's strained voice came out. We're just a little, understaffed at the moment. Somehow, his attempts at trying to make excuses for Chaldea didn't make her feel any better. In fact, they made her feel worse, reminding her that the entire reason Chaldea was like that in the first place was because of Lev. All dead are they? Olga furrowed her brows, whirling on the caster and opening her mouth to ask how he could possibly have known anything about their current situation before he stared at her. His blank wooded, root-covered face portraying nothing but an aura of self-assurance. It's a logical conclusion. The only reason I can see behind this display is if the competent workers are dead. Olga clicked her tongue, looking away from him in a huff. It was unbecoming of her to put on such an emotional display like that, but the last few weeks had really been testing her patience. What the hell was taking Romani and Da Vinci so long? Although I am curious as to what you find so intriguing about this Ma. Oh, never mind. I see it. Sullivan's shadow fell over her, his voice sounded mildly interested before it became flat. Olga looked over her shoulder at the taller caster. See what? This city. Castor pointed at Valencium. It is situated over a ley line. Although I suspect you already had suspicions about that and merely wished to confirm them. She opened her mouth to reply when the caster waved his hand, but yes. It now makes sense why they didn't pursue you, they merely needed access to the ley line itself. For their ritual. Ritska guessed. Olga felt the briefest hints of relief that he was learning, albeit slowly, and was getting to the point where he could make a somewhat educated guess. Indeed. Sullivan nodded, or, I suspect at least. He placed both his hands on the table, leaning over it, although the true question is why. Because even with their current ley lines and the Grail, they lack power. A feminine voice called out. The room trailed their eyes up to see the form of Da Vinci in the hologram. The woman cupped her chin as she looked the caster up and down. Yes, I can see you aren't completely human. These readings put you closer to an elemental than a normal heroic spirit. A fairy perhaps, she muttered, then shook her head and beamed at them. Doesn't matter right now, I suppose. The genius Leonardo da Vinci has come to support you all. At least you don't sound like an imbecile. Sullivan retorted, but you would likely be correct. Admittedly, opening a doorway into the abyss is something that took great effort to achieve. However, records on how to achieve it were non-existent in Orlando and I never made a journey to the cathedral archives. And St. Aldrich is from this cathedral. That is where he resided during his days as a cleric. Sullivan nodded. After the church fell to the deep, Aldrich established his own sect of religion. He has a grand knowledge of many of the old rituals and sorceries of the deep, far more so than myself. How difficult do you suspect it would be to open up a rift into this reality marble? Traveling between worlds is nothing complicated. Sullivan replied, although the abyss resided is a place outside of the world itself, a separate entity kept at bay by the linking of the fire. You have no such fire to protect you, but you seem to have your own natural defenses in place to supplement for this missing element. Olga slowly widened her eyes and nodded rapidly, Gaia. The world would recognize it as a foreign source, something akin to an infection and work against it. Is that right? Sullivan mused, curious. In any event, this would likely require more effort than Aldrich anticipated. Would it stop it altogether? Da Vinci asked. Sullivan remained silent for a few moments before slowly shaking his head. No. Whatever worldly defenses you have will not hold it indefinitely. It required a curse of cycled time itself to hold the deep at bay for millennia. Even then, parts still slipped through the cracks and caused outbreaks in the Age of Fire. He interlocked his fingers together. Perhaps it could have halted the abyss near its conception, but that was before it was denied. He let out a dark chuckle. You are dealing with the soul of humanity itself. Your own nature, it was denied again and again. The abyss has long since achieved, perhaps not sentience, but it holds a will of its own. Olga bit her thumb in thought. It will find a way through then. It will. Sullivan nodded. Eventually, all Aldrich needs is to merely open the doorway for but the briefest of moments and that would be enough for the deep to spread. Nero looked around confused. What does this mean for us? You are working against time. Sullivan replied. Aldrich needs more power to complete the ritual, however without knowing his location, we cannot act to prevent him from achieving it. And the entire region is blanketed in interference, so we cannot track his precise location. Olga bit her lip, her entire expression turning anxious. Great. Not necessarily. Da Vinci's voice echoed out throughout the room. We cannot track the precise location, but if we sent you the right materials we could follow the drainage. Olga and Sullivan turned to the screen she was on. A ritual like this, and the draining of the ley lines themselves, they are naturally going to be traveling towards the epicenter of the ritual. Sullivan cupped his chin, slowly nodding his head. We would need only a general direction. Aldrich prefers safety, thus he would likely fortify himself within the closest citadel. Once we narrow down the direction, we'd need only consult the maps for the region. This is the only map we have. Vespasian pointed at the parchment on the tap. We have a few details on barbarian strongholds, but that's it. Not to mention the possibility that he has crafted a fortress of his own with the Grail. Olga sighed. With enough magical power, it would be child's play to convert the surroundings into fortress. We still need access to a ley line, right? Ritska stepped up to the table, rubbing the back of his head, and the closest one we know about, that is being affected, is in Valenzium. We need to take back the city then. Vespasian sighed, and with the men we have on hand, the closest reinforcements are days away. Time that would give Aldrich to advance the ritual further. Sullivan pointed out, for all my grievances with him, I cannot deny Gwyndolin's skill in illusion craft. He nodded towards Olga. You recall the armored warriors who surrounded us. The sentinels. Olga blinked. I thought those golems of some variety. No. Illusions. Sullivan dismissed. However, they are illusions with weight behind them. More than enough to match Aldrich's more potent creations. He paused. However, he would require enough magical energy for it. Olga bit her thumb, then looked at Ritska. You're going to need to make a contract with the Gwendolyn. Ritska blinked, pointing at himself. Me. What about you? Olga grit her teeth. I lack the affinity for it. I could only form a contract with Berserker because he effectively lacks any form of will love. His own. Right. Ritska nodded his head slowly, but, what about the current servants I have? He scratched the back of his neck. Am I even going to be able to support him? Your current archer and Gwendolyn both have independent action. Olga replied, they will be able to support themselves without drawing upon too much of your magical reserves for some time. Oh. Ritska nervously shrugged. Well, if he's up for it. I'll form a contract with him. He looked at Sullivan. They are a boy, right? The caster stared down at him for a few moments before he nodded his head once. Yes, despite his appearance, he is actually male. He wanted to be more like his sister. Letting loose a mocking snort, he slowly shook his head, probably hates himself for it now. Ritsuka wasn't exactly sure how he was supposed to respond to that, so he settled on an awkward nod before he turned away and walked out of the tent. Mash bowed her head at the group then swiftly followed after him. Does the god accept sacrifices? Nero asked Sullivan. The caster seemed to jolt at the suggestion, looking down at her. What manner of sacrifice do you plan to offer him? Nero cupped her chin in thought. We don't have any bulls or sheep available. She turned to Vespasian. Do we have any pigs left? We salvaged what we could. Vespasian responded, mainly dry provisions, we have some pigs. Could sacrifice one of those, my emperor. Nero beamed, looking back at the caster, would he accept a sacrifice of a pig? Your plan to appease Gwyndolin is to, quite literally, offer up cattle for slaughter to gain his favor. Yes, that is how we treat gods in Rome. Nero nodded, it is best to communicate with them. There is something terribly poetic about this situation. Sullivan mused, and I am caught between finding it amusing and insulting that I am to take part in it. Shrugging his shoulders, he turned away. In any event, it would be better to offer him a meal rather than simply dumping the animal in front of him and cutting its throat. Although I would advise not letting him suspect I was involved in the preparation of the food. Can you not cook? Hardly. I was the best cook in Orlando. Nero blinked, then why not? If you are so proud of your skills. Because poisoning the meals is far easier when you are the one making them. Sullivan scoffed, how else could I possibly deal with a lord? Quote. Does not one else think it's risky for someone made of wood to be anywhere near an open fire? Romani's voice came through, the man having come back for the tail end of the conversation. Also, how does he test things without a mouth? You ask many stupid questions. Sullivan replied, and should consider yourself lucky I am not within arm's reach of you. And believe me, no one appreciates that more than me right now. Romani chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck and looking away. Olga found her eyes drawn to his hands. Or rather, the plate that was currently in his hands. Doctor. She began, her voice deceptively calm, despite the inner rage she could feel building up inside her, is that a cake? Romani blinked, looking down at his confectionery, and then back to the director, unaware of the impending danger he was in. He nodded once and smiled, yep. I was surprised we still had some left, although I had to sneak past Marcus to get it, for some reason it was hidden away. He chuckled, taking a small piece out of it with his fork and shoveling it into his mouth. Weird, huh? Romani. The man paused, looking at her, stop eating my chocolate cake. The doctor slowly looked down at the cake he was eating, widening his eyes in alarm and then looking back at the director, frozen in realization and now suddenly aware of the burning rage in her eyes. Olga's patience had slowly been deteriorating. Seeing Romani, the slouch that he was, eating the cake she had been saving for a special occasion was, for her, the last straw. When he didn't immediately put down the cake and beg for forgiveness, she couldn't take it anymore. Stop eating my chocolate cake. Ritska Pav. A contract. Gwyndolin tilted his ever so slightly. Ritska felt a heavy pressure on his shoulders as Mash stood next to him. For what purpose? Well, Ritska rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know how much you are aware of servants, but. Do not believe me ignorant, human. Gwyndolin cut him off with a frown. I am aware of the purpose of a contract between spirit and summoner. I ask for what purpose should I accept? You don't have to. The master held up his hands, giving an easy-going smile. It's just in case you want to. I know most independent servants can't really use their noble phantasm more than once in most cases. Thou art correct. Gwyndolin nodded after a few moments. I strained myself considerably with the illusion of the boat. I could manifest perhaps 30 sentinels for an hour before I exhausted myself. Do you want to? This contract. Gwyndolin muttered, what would it do after the collapse of this deviation? I have no idea. He blinked, looking to Mash, what would it do? I'm not sure Senpai. She furrowed her brow. It might bring him to Chaldea or it might end after. He was summoned in response to the Grail here, so it might be like Cu-san in Fuyuki. Ritsuka nodded his head, turning back to the god. Well, there you have it, your lordship. He cringed at the title, rubbing the back of his neck. Sorry if I'm being a little casual, just never met a, god before. He paused. Well, not properly. Obviously. Gwyndolin huffed. Thy mannerisms are, he paused, properly. Ah, yeah. He nodded, then furrowed his brow. Your father was Gwyn, right? Gwyndolin gave a single nod. Ritska and Mash's eyes lit up with recognition. Ah, we met your older brother then. Quote dot dot dot. Beg thy pardon. MMMH. Ritska nodded, he was a little intense, but he helped us out in the end. Farum, right. Then there was Archon San. Mash pointed out, then winced, although at the time Farum San was out enemy so. Archon, of the Silver Knights. And, Gwyndolin seemed struggle to get the words out, and, my older brother. Yeah, Ritska nodded. Quote dot dot dot. I see. Gwyndolin seemed to slump into his illusionary chair. So, he made it to this throne of heroes. Yes, Gwyndolin San. Mash nodded her head. It was a big surprise though. Ash San said that all record of him was erased from the. Oh. She slowly paled, realizing that it had been their own father who had erased the history of the firstborn. Sigward had explained briefly about Archon accusing the god of betrayal. Ritska looked at Mash. What's ro? Oh. He slowly widened his eyes, flickering them back to the god who was remarkably still. Spoke with my brother, did you? He asked in a flat voice, all posturing and appearance of grandeur gone. Well. He, gave us some help, killed the person responsible for the singularity in the end and asked us to summon him, he finished in a quiet voice, looking away from the Lord. Ah, yes. Gwyndolin nodded, that sounds like brother. He looked at Mash, contract, yes. How is it performed? Mash blinked, senpai, you need to use the summoning chant. I do. The master blinked, then looked at Gwyndolin, coughing into his hand, are you sure? Quickly. Before I change my mind. Ritska winced at how tired the god sounded. Gwyndolin couldn't even bring himself to put any heat into the threat. Ash Pav. Because he's a god and the last thing I want is him after my head. Ash replied, so I would appreciate it if you did not mention my casual use of abyssal pyromancy. But Beatrice began, then paused, seemingly realizing the problem before she slowly nodded her head. Ah, right. Lord of Anor Londo. Very, anti-abyss aren't they? Considering that the world was cursed into a near-endless cycle of the flame having to be relit to keep it away. Yes. Ash replied in a dull voice, I would say that we're anti-abyss. Beatrice nodded her head, her eyes flickering over to he camp before back to Ash. Am I useful? What? The saber blinked, looking down at her and raising an eyebrow. What do you mean? I feel as though I haven't been pulling my weight. Beatrice replied, nervously fidgeting her hands, all the other servants have some special skills to them and have been pulling their weight so far. I'm just sort of, here. There is no need to be so dour. Ash frowned, I am certain that you will have plenty of opportunities to prove yourself in the future. That just means I haven't proven myself so far. Beatrice slumped, I don't even have any special skills beyond making catalysts out of sticks. Giving a mirthless huff, she stared down at her staff. My sorcery is average at best. I can't exactly teach it to anyone because I learned on the fly as a hermit. Even my noble phantasm is false. False. Soul Storm. She rattled off with a frown. It's nothing more than a high-ranked sorcery that I reportedly used once. I didn't even use it. It was a case of mistaken identity. Some other hermit who looked a little like me used it once, and suddenly, watch out for the witch Beatrice. I'm a fraud. I got my sword from a man I killed. Ash shrugged, gesturing to his armor, I looted this from a corpse. My bottomless box is filled with the weapons of better warriors. My strength is gifted to me by merely slaying hollows and other beasts. He scoffed, I'm unkindled to begin with. What even is that? It means I was so worthless that I could not even link the fire. Ash chuckled, so worthless that I was turned to dust by the kiln and then when those who truly linked the fire abandoned their duty were we raised from our graves to succeed where they failed. Beatrice remained silent for a few moments before she spoke up. What is linking the fire, anyway? Quote dot dot dot. What? Ash recoiled. What? You keep mentioning that but I have no idea what you mean. She went on, tilting her head to the side and flushing with embarrassment. It's not important is it? I don't look like an idiot right now to I. Ash was merely staring at her in shock. You're from before it, he muttered. He bit his lip. Looking away for a few moments, his eyes occasionally flicking back to her before his shoulders slumped, a frown came upon his face, the linking of the fire. The world was cursed. It remained cursed for millennia. The fire would be linked, or the age of dark would come. All right. Beatrice nodded once, but what does that actually mean? It means undead would empower themselves with souls and then throw themselves upon the first flame as fuel, offering their essence to renew the age of fire. He explained, I was told that, for a time, the undead curse was cured by the linking of the flame, at least until it began to fade again. What, but, Beatrice widened her eyes in shock, taking a step back, but that doesn't. How long has it been going on for? Gwyndolin would know the answer to that. He replied, as a lord and child of Gwyn, he would have lived through all the ages. The unkindled saber sighed, looking up at the sky with a blank expression, not that linking the flame would have done much good in my age. What do you? There were so few humans left, Ash murmured, so few indeed. Hey, guys. Ritzka's voice called out across the camp. The servants turned their heads in his direction to see him and Mash marching towards the center. Emperor Nero is about to make a speech. Quote. If it's another proposal towards my firekeeper, I will not be pleased. Ash muttered under his breath. My Romans. Nero proclaimed with a wide grin, throwing her arms to the side and somehow sending rose petals across her makeshift stage. We have, all of us, been at the mercy of fiends for too long. Some murmurs of agreement went out across the camp as the emperor continued on. However, we will no longer be subject to the wicked desires of these barbarians and their beasts. Waving her right arm in the direction of the Chaldeans, she went on, with the aid of these noble travelers, we will march into the heart of this invasion of our glorious empire, slay the wicked monster who has plagued us for too long, and restore our empire to its prime. Cheers went up as hundreds of fists were enthusiastically pumped into the air. Nero nodded her head, however. We will need to act fast. We shall not have the luxury of time on our side in this war for our survival. As we are now, I shall lead you brave children of Rome myself. She's better at making speeches than me. Ritzka whispered to Mash. Vrindari leaned down behind him. She is an emperor. I think it's expected of her. Thought I was attending a theater for second. Lucian muttered, where did the flowers come from? Furrowing his brows at the red petals, didn't even see her bring any of them. Are they magic? Gareth whispered in confusion. Magic petals would be a new one. Lucian grunted, taking his hat off and scratching his head, and that would be saying something. Do you stand with your emperor? Yeah. These guys are going to die. The hunter sighed as he watched the cheering crowd of legionnaires. Solaire turned his head, giving the hunter a disapproving frown from behind his helmet. There's not need for that. I'm being honest. Lucian grumbled back, these lads are better at killing men, not beasts. True. Solaire nodded, however. You are forgetting one thing, my friend. Oh. Solaire threw a thumb over his shoulder, we have a giant. Lucian gave him a slow blink, following the thumb and trailing his eyes up to look at Goff. Quote. Fair enough. Masters Pav. At present, Valenzium lies 3 days away from here. The legate spoke first, capturing the city will be difficult. Worse if those creatures are still lingering there. Those can be left to us. Ritzka stepped forward, we can deal with the enemy servants. Turning to the side, he gave Olga a supportive smile, right, director. Of course. The woman smirked, it would be embarrassing for us to be defeated with the numbers we have. Very well. Vespasian nodded, we'll need a plan then. The gatehouse will still be destroyed, unless the spiders have webbed over it. They don't like the light. Ritzka responded, barely withholding his shiver at the thought of the spiders again, we can attack during the day. If it's webbing we need to worry about, then Ash and Quelaag can burn it away. He paused, and maybe the other berserker we have. He has like, a furnace in his chest. Hesitantly adding on, sending a questioning glance at Nero, Does he catch on fire, Emperor Nero? I do not know. The woman responded with shrug. In truth, they simply turned up and decided to guard the gate. I have no knowledge of why. All right then. Ritzka coughed, turning to Vespasian, we can handle the servants and then if we defeat them quickly enough, help you with anything else. Vespasian stared at him for a few moments before nodding his head, the strategy is bare bones, at best. Ritzka winced at the blunt assessment before the legate cupped his chin, however, it is a plan nonetheless. With our timeframe apparently so dire, it is the best we have available to us. How quickly can we prepare the troops to march? Nero asked, leaning forwards and crossing her arms. The legate scrunched up his face for a few moments before slowly nodding his head in affirmation of his own estimations. Within the next day. Gesturing around them, marching during the night is suicide. The spiders will tear us to bits and with your new friends and the god whose aid you have secured, we will be able to form a workable perimeter. Nodding her head in acknowledgement, Nero turned to Ritska and Olga. You are welcome to stay in the best tents we have available. I'm sure that the Imperial. What the fuck? Came a rather panicked shout from outside the tent. The four individuals paused in their conversation, each sharing a glance before they span around and rushed outside, only to gape at what they saw. The Romans nearby were flat on their asses, all gazing up at the newly sprouted mansion, slap bang in the middle of the camp, having seemingly materialized. What is? Olga gaped like a fish, Nero following suit. I explained my talents before, did I not? Came Gwyndolin's self-assured voice. They slowly turned their heads down to the entrance of the decorative building to see the Lord casually standing at the open door. However, it would have been larger had I been a caster. Ritska let out a disbelieving chuckle, shaking his head. I think it's pretty impressive as is. My lord. Gwyndolin's lip curled down. I would prefer thee not address mine person with insincere titles. Wincing, the master awkwardly nodded his head once. Should I just call you Archer then? Or Lord Gwendolin? The latter shall suffice. Answering his question, the Lord turned away from him and towards the rest of the group. Is there some issue? Issue? Nero parroted in shock. Absolutely not. Beaming, she strut forwards towards the Lord, stopping just shy of him and throwing her arms wide while gesturing to his newly constructed house. This is most spectacular. To think you could make such things from nothing. No, Olga stepped forwards, cupping her chin. These are illusions, aren't they? Indeed. The Lord nodded. Without myself, they would fade away to nothing. Incredible, she muttered, eyes wide. I've never seen gradation air used to such an extent before. Squinting her eyes, she stepped forwards and gingerly placed her hand on the wall to the building. And Gaia hasn't even rejected it yet. Turning her head back to the god, she widened her eyes at his wording. You said you could be summoned as a caster. If I had been, the sentinels would have been trivial. Gwendolin waved his hand. Although my more complicated illusions are beyond me. He looked up. My Nobel phantasm could only create a false day for but a few minutes. False day. Olga squeaked, narrowing her eyes and running her master vision through them to get a look at the stats of their ally. Then raised her eyebrows up her head, slumping her shoulders in disbelief. His physical stats were nothing impressive, indeed they would have been better suited for a caster. His noble phantasms on the other hand, were nothing short of high tier. Generating an illusion of the sun or the moon to empower himself or rain arrows down. He was an A-rank caster in the class of an archer. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that. Ash Pav. The unkindled saber sat down just at the edge of the camp, staring off into the distance as the sounds of the soldiers went about behind him. He would have rested with the fire keeper, but she seemed to be having fun holding an actual conversation with some of the other servants. He'd often seen her smile before, but it was a small thing and one she'd only give him whenever he returned because he was her only true company. Sure, Gririt and the like had spoken with her as well as Andre, but they had little to speak of. It was pleasing to him that she seemed to find friendly acquaintances so easily. She also held a spring in her step that she had lacked back in Lothric. Perhaps it was because she was experiencing so many new things. In any event, it did make him feel just a bit better. So, this is where you skulked off to. Like that, whatever good mood he had, was snuffed out. He frowned came about behind his helmet as the familiar voice called out behind him. Admittedly, acting like a dog to obey commands comes easily to you, does it not? Ash didn't respond to him, something that elicited a mild chuckle from the pontiff as he moved to stand just behind the saber. Come now, should you be so cold towards your allies? I had thought those of the Sunlight Covenant relished in, what was it? Jolly cooperation. Do not mock me. He snapped back, shooting to his feet and whirling around to face the pontiff, and do not think to act so cordial. I am well aware of your true nature, false pontiff. False. Sullivan tilted his head. If there are none who would challenge the title, how could it possibly be false? Massacring a city will leave you with no dissenting voices. The snarl in his voice became more apparent, and you usurped the position, it was not handed to you through any deeds. Of course I usurped the position. Sullivan scoffed, shaking his head. How else was any form of change going to take place? A single finger was raised, but more importantly than that, I had something I wished to ask you. I feel as though you have been avoiding me. You should trust your instincts. Ash growled, they would keep you alive longer. Refrain from such displays. Sullivan waved his hand. I realize you are angry, but you are merely directing it at me. I direct it at your actions. My actions. How do they, in any way, affect you? The caster cocked his head to the side. If anything, you should be grateful to me. Gra. Grateful. The saber stomped forwards until he was face to face with the caster. The height difference between the two did little to diminish Ash's stature. Grateful for your butchery. For your slaughter of hundreds of innocents. Of your servitude to Aldrich. Oh. Did you want to kill them? Sullivan asked in an innocent voice. Ash froze. His body stilled as the air around them began to heat up. What? Hissing the word through his teeth, Ash clenched his hands. You are aware that the entire population of Arithil were devout flame worshippers. Unless you believe that they would have merely stood aside while you abandoned your duty and put an end to their entire religion, you would have had to kill them all too. The wooden face of Sullivan creaked. The changes in his facial structure indicated a smile taking place. Not to mention Gwendolyn, he would have had you killed for such things. You, what? Did that not occur to you until just now? My disagreements with them do not give cause for what you did. Oh, I merely made their bodies reflect their nature. Chuckling, the caster stepped back and held his hands out in front of him, mindless hollows who endlessly chase after a smidgen of fire. Does that not sound familiar? You. As a joke. A very amusing one as well, I found. Quite satisfying as well. Putting up with their dogged obsession with that crooked belief was vexing. Shaking his head, Sullivan shrugged, and really, is there any great loss? Even if I didn't kill them, they would have likely died in the Age of Dark anyway. You. Yes, I know about that as well. Sullivan mused, a firekeeper with eyes. Really. Abyssal pyromancy's in your hand now too. You might as well announce to all you ended the first flame, although you do not strike me as a Lord of Hollows. Must have merely not encountered the church then. He whispered that last part in a disinterested tone, but tell me, unkindled, when you allowed the flame to fade, when you watched it sputter out and felt the darkness creep in, what did you feel? Why should it matter to you? Considering you realized my long-held goal, I feel as though I deserve some words from my successor. He chuckled, but what was it? Did you feel anger? Glee? Nothing. You have not the right to discuss what I felt. Ash shouted back, what I did was necessary. Oh, was it truly? There was a mocking tone in Sullivan's voice. You must have felt very strongly about it then. I suppose that the first flame should have known that once the lords abandoned their duty, the unkindled it raised would as well. TCH. Ash clicked his tongue. It was a pathetic little thing, scarcely brighter than a bonfire. I could have put it out by accident if I had kicked Ash over it. So that was it then, you felt satisfaction. What would you have me say? That I watched the flame sputter out and laughed. That I watched 1,000 cycles come to an end as the dark closed in. Ash huffed. What reaction would please you? Quote. You have no idea what even happened at the end, did you? No. Ash clicked his tongue, looking away. I was pulled away before the dark had gotten close to me. Sullivan stilled, slowly tilting his head to the side. Is that right? I wonder. He mused, staring away at something before letting out a low chuckle. Not that it matters in the end. Still, I had hoped for a less lackluster response from an unkindled. Disappointing you makes it almost worth it. Don't be so juvenile. Watching you attempt to attach your emotions to perceived rights is painful to observe. Sullivan pointed a crooked finger at the saber. Admit it, their deaths mean as much to you as they did to me. They could have learned. No, they really couldn't. Living under the benevolence of Anor Londo for years robbed them of any potential good they could have done. And that is for you to judge. If not me, then who? Who else was left in the world that held any hint of sanity? Sullivan scoffed. Gwendolyn himself looks as though he just crawled out of Ariamis with the melancholy clinging to him. Even before, he never cared for those people, he never even ensured the linking went on. He merely handed it off to those in Lothric and retired to waste away. Ash narrowed his eyes. And why did the twin princes abandon their duty? They had not even linked the fire before they decided they would not fulfill their oath. I was merely a humble tutor. Was the reply he received, and a careless shrug of the shoulders from the caster. I offered my opinion on the world to the princes and they accepted it. Kill them to did you? Quote. Oh, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Sullivan sighed. A pity. Prince Lothric was the only one to heed my wisdom. I suppose it was expected that he would be killed for it. Don't act as if it is some tragedy to you. On the contrary, I am quite saddened by the boy's death. I put a great deal of effort into his education. Sullivan released a breathless sigh. Not that it should matter too greatly to you. I wonder how many you cut down on your quest to uphold my mission. What do you want? I want to hear you say it. No. Denying the words does not make them any less true. Being correct that the flame had to end did not make your mission right either. Ash countered, what does it matter anymore? We're both dead and that world probably followed suit. That is what is so strange to me, you don't seem too concerned about it. Cupping his chin, Sullivan paced around the saber. Now, the firekeeper, even with her eyes, would have given vague warnings. Aldrich was like that, but you seem confident in something else. Ah, I see. He paused, slowly turning back to Ash. Found Arya, did you? How do you know about her? I come from the painted world, fool. Sullivan snarked. Of course I would know about her. Although we never met, Sister Fried was very good at hiding that from me. He suddenly paused, looking at Ash. Kill her as well. Yes. Sullivan gave an uncaring shrug. Fair enough. No great loss. What made her wield her scythe against you? Tried to burn away the rot. Quote. Yes. That would do it. The caster mused. I suppose that means Ariandel is dead, simpleton that he was. Let me guess, Gale led you to the painting. Ash jolted. How did you? Who do you think told me of Arya? Sullivan let out another quiet chuckle as he turned away, striding back towards the camp. But I am satisfied, my questions have been answered. Ash remained where he was, watching the caster disappear off back into the camp before he let out a huff of annoyance and turned around to face the outside of their perimeter. He quietly watched as the sun began to set in the distance. Next day Pav. Right, everyone. Ritska cleared his throat as he addressed the servants. Olga and Mash were stood next to him. We're going to take up the vanguard position. We'll advance and deal with the more dangerous targets while the Romans come in behind us and sweep up what's left. Vrindari raised his hand. Yes, my liege, are the giant and Arash going to be providing support from the distance? Yeah, Ritska nodded, looking to the two archers. Goff and Arash are going to use their range to support any targets we can see. His eyes slowly drifted to Gwyndolin. Aye. Are you going to help them, Lord Gwyndolin? Hawkeye Goff is a better archer than I. Gwyndolin replied, my sorceries would be better served on the battlefield. Right. Ritska nodded, turning back to Vrindari. There you have it, Goff and Arash are going to provide cover fire for us. They're going to set us on fire. Beatrice squeaked. What? No. It's an expression. Oh, sorry. No harm. Ritska shook his head, anyway. The two berserkers, he paused, turning to Olga, Kanai, or are you going to say it? You have already begun. Olga waved her hand, and it would do you well to act the part of a competent master. Okay. Turning back, he went on, the two berserkers are going to be our heavy hitters, they'll be dealing with the nasty things made from corpses, and if he's there, Vort. He snapped his fingers and pointed further down the line. Gareth and Sif are our fast hitters, they'll be running around causing as much chaos as possible. Ash and Quelaag are our resident flame users, so if the spiders appear, that's on you. You could at least look me in the eyes when you give me orders. Quelaag joked with a smirk on her face at the fact that Ritska was very pointedly not looking in her direction. To joke with the human so, you must be quite fond of him. Shut up. I'm not fond of him. It's funny to watch him squirm around like that. Quelaag-san, does that mean you're warming up to us? Mash asked in a hopeful tone of voice, a bright glow in her eyes, causing the rider to sulk and look away from her, only to be met with Goff-amused laughter. Moving on. Ritska cleared his throat. While that's happening, Sullivan, Lord Gwyndolin and Beatrice are going to be our mid-range support because of their use of spells and such. What about Solaire and the Hunter? Ash asked, crossing his arms. Where shall they be? Solaire, the Hunter and Cecilia. Ritska winced at Ash suddenly stilling, have offered to run interference. They'll be attacking the small opponents and the weird thing if it appears. The Firekeeper. My Firekeepers, is on the front line. She said she can summon a copy of you and that she wanted to help. Ritska offered, I wasn't really going to turn her down after then. Quote. Fair enough. Ash shrugged, she can be quite stubborn. Myself, Olga and Mash are going to be with the Emperor. Ritska went on, who wanted to be on the front line as well. What? Olga's head snapped to him so fast, when was I included in that? Well, Nero commanded it. Ritska cringed, she said she wanted the pale rose to behold her magnificence. Forget her magnificence, she's human, you dullard. Olga snapped, she'll be cut down the first chance that some freakish spider familiar catches her in its sight. See, I thought so too. Ritska nodded his head, then I watched her snap a steel sword with her bare hands. Quote. It's true, director. Romani's face popped up. She's human, no doubt about it, but her reading are on par with a servant. He shrugged, I can't explain it, perhaps she's being empowered by the counter-force. Olga opened her mouth to argue, then snapped it shut and furrowed her brows. That makes a disturbing amount of sense. She frowned, crossing her arms. It would also lend credence to the reports that she fought the spiders herself. Shaking her head, regardless, it is his good plan. She nodded once, a small smile playing on her face. Well done. Huh, you must have done something right, Fujimaru. Romani grinned, I rarely see her do that. Shut up, slouch. Olga hissed at him, I'm still getting you back for that cake. Romani made a noise akin to a scared cat. Long chapter this time. Figured I probably should start making them longer, means I don't spend as much time on differing arcs. But yes, I have decided to do all the events as well. Which means that after this singularity is finished, someone is going to raid Chaldea for dumplings.